Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks for the blessings which have been bestowed on us. Laying aside all personal interests, we acknowledge the King and pray for guidance in our deliberations, that we may conduct the affairs of this House with wisdom, justice, mercy and humility, for the welfare and peace of New Zealand. Amen.
Amen.
To make a motion without notice or debate to mark the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Fana Efeso Collins.
Leave is sought for that purpose. Is there any objection? There appears to be none.
I move that this House mark the 1-year anniversary of the passing of Fana Efeso Collins tomorrow, the 21st of February 2025, and acknowledge his contribution to the country, to the communities he belonged to, and to his ainga, his family.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The motion is agreed. Members, I've received a letter from the Honourable Kieran McAnulty seeking to debate under Standing Order 399 today's reporting that the Minister responsible for the RMO reform received advice from the Clerk on the admissibility of amendments to the Fast Track Approvals Bill in July of 2024. This is a particular case of recent occurrence for which there is ministerial responsibility. Ministers and members regularly receive advice from the Clerk. That is in itself not remarkable. The substantive matters arising from this particular piece of advice were traversed during the committee stages of the Fast Track Approvals Bill. I do not think that the business of the House should be set aside today to revisit them. For clarity, I would reiterate that the rules and practices of the House regarding the private legislation have not changed. Existing standing orders and Speaker's rulings still apply. Bills or amendments to the for the particular interest or benefit of individuals or groups are still classified as being in the nature of private legislation, as it states in Standing Order 2571D, regardless of whether they are deemed to be public policy. In the case of the Fast Track Approvals Bill, I drew a different conclusion to the Clerk, having taken his advice and considered that the individual benefits to the projects listed in the schedule were not sufficiently clear, given the bill itself prescribed the process they must still go through. I refer members to Standing Order 2572. The application for an urgent debate is declined. Petitions. The Leader of the House, the Honourable Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Today the House will adjourn until the 4th of March, and that week we'll consider the committee stage of the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill, as well as the associated second readings of the Regulatory Systems Immigration and Workforce Amendment Bill and the Regulatory Systems Economic Development Amendment Bill. On Wednesday there will be extended hours where the first item of business will be the remaining stages of the Te Koroai o Aotearoa Claims Settlement Bill.
Petitions. No petitions have been delivered to the Clerk for presentation. Ministers have delivered 2 papers.
2023-24 annual reports for the Government Communications Security Bureau and the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service.
I present the report of Ministers. I present the report of the Controller and Auditor General entitled Observation from Audits of Council's 2024-2034 Long-Term Plans. Those papers are published under the authority of the House. 5 Select Committee reports have been delivered for presentation.
Report of the Health Committee on the 2023-24 annual review of the New Zealand Blood and Organ Service. Report of the Intelligence and Security Committee on the 2023-24 annual reviews of the Government Communications Security Bureau and the New Zealand Security Intelligence Service. Reports of the Social Services and Community Committee on the 2023-24 annual review of Sport and Recreation New Zealand, the 2023-24 annual review of the Arts, Culture and Heritage Sector and the Social Workers Registration Amendment Bill.
The bill is set down for second reading. The Clerk has been informed of the introduction of 3 bills.
Sale and supply of alcohol, sales on Anzac Day morning, Good Friday, Easter Sunday and Christmas Day Amendment Bill, introduction. Enabling Crown entities to adopt Māori names Bill, introduction. Financial markets, conduct of institutions, amendment, duty to provide financial services Amendment Bill, introduction.
Those bills are set down for first reading. The House comes to oral questions. I call on Ricardo Mendes-March.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction. Will the government's policies and actions ensure Aotearoa meets the long-term target of reducing child material hardship to 6% by 2028? If not, will it change its policies to do so?
The Honourable Shane Reti.
Speaker, on behalf of the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction, child poverty statistics released today show that although there was no significant change to child poverty rates, lifting children out of material hardship will be an ongoing challenge. Since 2017, there are now around 17,000 more children in material hardship. By not meeting the previously set second intermediate targets, the highly ambitious 10-year targets will be that much more challenging. We know we have more work to do, which is why this government has a target to lift 17,000 more children out of material hardship by 2027. We are relentlessly focused on growing the economy to enable us to invest in reducing child poverty.
Supplementary. Is she concerned about multiple reports that show that kids won't have food on the table because of funding expiring for food banks, parents won't be able to afford the basics because of cuts to benefit indexation, and the working poor are seeing the minimum wage fall behind inflation? And if so, what about this government's record should give New Zealanders any confidence that they will reduce child poverty?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, we are concerned with all of the measures for material hardship, which is why we have introduced tax relief, family boost and increased the in-work tax credit.
Is it correct that the changes to benefit indexations will mean benefits will now rise at a lower rate than previously set by other governments?
Mr. Speaker, that's a specific question. Happy to take that on writing.
Is it supplementary?
Just wait for a bit, quiet.
Thank you. Is the government on track to meet its child poverty targets given the failure to reduce material hardship to 9% in the 2023-2024 year? And if not, what will she do about it?
Mr. Speaker, we set the intermediate target in or around June last year for 11% for material hardship is the intermediate target we have set. And we're encouraged by Treasury modelling that shows that our investments in budget 2024 will lift 17,000 children out of poverty on the after housing cost measures by 2026-27.
Why did she set these interim targets that can be met with, according to Treasury's forecasts, zero further action from this government? And does that highlight just how little ambition she has for the thousands of kids who will stay in poverty as a result?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, these targets are ambitious. In a challenging environment, they will take quite a bit of effort to reach, and we're very encouraged by the targets that we have set and the investment that we've made, particularly through Budget 2024 and other investments we will make.
Does she accept these interim targets that her own government set require zero further action from this government to address child poverty?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, no.
That's not correct.
Supplementary, the Honourable Shane Jones.
On the matter to the Speaker of material hardship, what impact do questions from woke-riddled March Hare
No further.
politicians
No
have?
further. Thank you. Dan Bedwar, question 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, what recent reports has she seen on the economy?
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, yesterday's monetary policy statement confirmed annual CPI inflation is sustainably within the 1 to 3% target range, giving the Reserve Bank confidence to continue lowering the official cash rate. In other words, the era of high inflation is over. And of course, New Zealanders hurt a lot between 21 and 2023 when inflation went over 7%, eroding people's wages and savings. Spending constraint and price stability is back.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. How is the government helping to keep inflation under control?
On behalf of the Minister of Finance, of course, the Reserve Bank has primary responsibility for controlling inflation, but the government of the day can either help that task or hinder it through decisions around tax and spending. This is a government that is helping. We've introduced discipline to government spending after years of largesse. And the Reserve Bank says in the monetary policy statement that government expenditure is still assumed to decline as a share of the economy over the medium term, reducing inflationary pressure.
Supplementary. By how much will households benefit from lower interest rates?
Well, Mr Speaker, people's circumstances, on behalf of the Minister, people's circumstances vary, so there's no one exact answer. But to give an illustration that helps demonstrate the point, for someone with a $500,000 mortgage over 25 years, a 1 percentage point drop in their interest rate reduces their required repayments by around $150 a fortnight. That is a significant reduction that could be used elsewhere in the household budget. So a decline in the OCR has a real material impact on households' budgets and helps New Zealanders get ahead.
Good news. And supplementary, what is the Reserve Bank's forecast for economic growth in the next year?
Oh, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, more good news. The Reserve Bank expects economic growth to have returned in the December quarter of last year, then forecast growth of 2.4% over 2025. This is in line with other forecasters, including Westpac, which expects growth of 2.5% this year. BNZ expects 2.6%, and ANZ expects 2.7%. This economy is back in growth, and we need to accelerate that from this point on.
Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
In confirming that the era of high inflation is over, can you also confirm that the era of borrow and hope, which we inherited, is also over?
Well, on behalf of the Minister, the government will be borrowing for some time to come, but we are working as hard as possible to get off the trajectory of endless debt-fuelled consumption that pushes up prices and pushes up inflation and inevitably pushes up interest rates, and going for sustainable growth based on sound principles of price stability and a market-led economy.
Ready? Question number 3, point of order.
Thank you very much. So last Thursday, you committed to the House that you would go away and consider the requirements of ministers answering questions on behalf of the Prime Minister. I would have hoped that we might get that clarity before this question.
Yes, and I apologise for not having come back to you. There's been one or two other things that have caused a bit of a distraction today. The Honourable Carmel Cipollone, question 3.
Mr Speaker, to the Prime Minister, does he stand by all his government statements and actions?
On behalf of the Prime Minister, as I've said over 300 times, yes.
Supplementary. Who does he agree with? Winston Peters, who said, quote, "The name of this country is New Zealand. This person who came here in 2006, you're not going to change it," end quote. Or David Seymour, who said that, quote, "Well, I prefer to use New Zealand. I'm not here to stop other people saying Aotearoa," end quote. Or will he maintain his silence on this issue?
As an answer that's based on intellectual and academic integrity, the name of this country was always New Zealand until Pemba Reeves decided in the 1880s that he would call it Aotearoa, which is a massive insult to the people of Ngai Tahu. That's not their name, and we are going to not make a name change for this country until, in the democratic traditions of this great nation, we first consult and get the agreement of the New Zealand people.
That's an interesting
Supplementary. Do Winston Peters' comments suggest that New Zealanders who were born overseas should have fewer rights than those who were born here? And if so, will he condemn that?
Look, it is very, very clear that Mr. Peters made no such suggestion at all, but he paralleled the fact that in 2006, an application was made to a country called New Zealand, and that is still the same country that that person came to. Now, that's not an attack on any immigration or any immigrant at all.
Mr Speaker, will he stick up for migrant communities by disciplining Winston Peters and Shane Jones for their repeated attacks on members of Parliament based entirely on their country of origin, or will he continue to keep his head down by pretending that his minister's comments are not his problem?
the simple answer to that is that if you get a fallacious statement like that, it doesn't bear a response at all.
Well, it does, actually, according to the rules. It just doesn't want to answer, does it?
Mr. Speaker, how will he achieve the National New Zealand First Coalition agreement to train no fewer than 500 new frontline police by 27th of November 2025 when there are now 72 fewer police officers than when he became Prime Minister?
I thank the member for that question. The current police planning is for up to 650 recruits to commence training in the first half of 2025. This is 75 more than in the entirety of the 23-24 year the previous government was responsible for. We, in short, are on track.
Going backwards.
Does he agree with Winston Peters that the target of 500 additional police by the 27th of November 2025 would be magically be met if police officers or officials would merely read the National New Zealand First Coalition agreement, or does he agree with the Police Commissioner who has all but admitted that the target won't be met until 2026 at the earliest?
Given the very, very remarkable record of Mr. Peters on this matter, where the last tranche of such training was a commitment for 1,800 but it ended up being successfully 2,338 in that tranche. And we are setting up for the same performance this time around. So that's why we've got confidence that on this matter we're on track.
Mr. Speaker, is Winston Peters actually accomplishing anything for Aotearoa when he tells members of migrant communities that their views are worth less than people born in Aotearoa, and he instructs officials that they can meet political targets just by reading a coalition agreement? Or will he acknowledge that this is a divisive and counterproductive way to run a government?
That member will get an answer when she asks the question about a country called New Zealand, for which I'm responsible.
Point of order, the Honourable Kira McAnulty.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be concerned if the requirements on ministers to answer questions falls into a debate as to whether the use of te reo Māori is appropriate in this House. Yesterday, you said that you would go back and consider two pretty important things. One, whether the application of the convention in this House that te reo and English can be interchangeable regardless of the word, and two, whether it is appropriate for members to question the legitimacy of other members given where they came from. Now, that response there to that question, albeit political, was simply about that very thing. And if we don't get clarity from you onto this issue, then I suspect we're going to be hearing that a lot, and it will lead to disorder, which of course is your job to maintain.
Well, the clarity point is... Speaker, point of order. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, this country has hard-working taxpayers who have spent billions of dollars over the years in an export-dependent nation to try and sell a name of a country called New Zealand. And this is all being changed without any mandate or access to the people of this country, which is our democratic responsibility.
So 2 points. Okay, we'll go with the Honourable Willie Jackson.
Some direction from you on this. And I ask that very respectfully, given how precious the language is in this House, and I think you acknowledge that, but it is sadly being dumped on by two of the most senior Māori members in this Parliament who are questioning the legitimacy. And I ask you to make a ruling on this, yes or no, in terms of the legitimacy of te reo Māori.
Kohana Linden.
It's on our passport. I too support clarity from you, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the use of te reo Māori in the House. When thinking about the way that we do promote ourselves as Aotearoa New Zealand on the international stage, it's in all of our strategic documents, it's on our passports, so why can we not celebrate te reo Māori in this House?
Well, the first point is we most certainly can, and there is no question that standing orders make it appropriate for either language to be used in an interchangeable way. I don't think that standing order should become confused over a viewpoint that one person might have on the use of the word Aotearoa compared to another person's view on the use of that word. And it comes to the answering of... Oh, I'm in the middle of a ruling. You broke my flow. And it comes to the answering of a question, as was raised there. I think it becomes very hard for the Speaker to determine that a question has not been addressed if the question is in the first place, in the answer, rejected. And I think that's the difficulty that we face here. But let me be very clear, standing order, I think it's 109, someone can check that if they like, makes it the use of either the English language or Te Reo Māori perfectly acceptable. There's no question about that. The Honourable Shane Jones.
So I'd like to draw your attention to an important point. Whilst it is correct you're something of an auditor of parliamentary conduct, the member from Labour is asking you to audit political narrative. That is not your role.
That's what I just said.
But, sir, day after day, when different political perspectives are being issued on controversial issues, you're getting dragged into it. That is not how Parliament should work.
Well, that's true. And but I have to say, from my own point of view, I'd be completely naive if I thought that political matters were never going to be discussed in this House, and that there wasn't somehow a number of occasions where people have differences. That's the point of having the Parliament, and all sides need to get a little less sensitive about some of the things that are said quite safely in this room, because we do have a safe democracy. Ricardo Mendes March. Yep.
I wanted to wait till the end of the question, particularly as a Prime Minister was answering questions to the Honourable Carmel Saponi. I noted something yesterday that has been repeated again, and that has been the delegitimization of people's contributions by using the time of arrival to someone who's a citizen to this country. I'm asking you to reflect as to the appropriateness of that, particularly because of the ramifications that that has to people outside of this chamber. And when people are utilising someone's date of arrival, it does seem like it delegitimizes someone standing in this House.
Well, it's all very well to say that the Speaker should become the interferer and run interference on all sorts of things in this House. The reality is that standing orders provide a remedy for people who have been offended in this House. Well, then what is the point? And I'm sorry to ask it, because I don't want to have a discussion about that here, but you're welcome to come and talk to me about that. I think the general public make up their own minds about these things, and I don't think that some of the claims that, and some of the extraordinary communications I've had on this bear out the way in which New Zealanders generally think. The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Speaker, that last point of order was grossly out of time. The member, if he was going to make that point of order, had to raise it at the right time, but we've moved on. And coming late to the party and not knowing what the rules are, he got away with it. You should have stopped him on the basis that he was out of time.
Oh, well, you know, my failings are many in all of this stuff, which I freely admit. We'll move now to question 4. Point of order. The Honourable Kieran McAnulty.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I had attempted to seek a point of order, but there were 2 prior, so I don't want to be accused of being out of time. As you point out, Standing Order 109, which you have clarified today, allows members of this House to address you in either English, Te Reo Māori or sign language. My point, however, was yesterday you made a suggestion that when it came to geographical terms, it might be reasonable to expect members to use the English version alongside the Te Reo Māori version. And I think that's the point that the House needs clarity on. Given by what you just said now, is it no longer your view that that is required? And if members want to say Aotearoa, or indeed, for example, whakaoriori instead of Masterton, you're not requiring us to follow it up with an English version?
Look, I said yesterday that I wanted to bring to the House a sound ruling on this. So I don't want to make it up from the seat. Didn't yesterday, I'm not doing it today. I certainly want to find out where the New Zealand geographic board is on all these things. So let's do it absolutely properly. But the other thing is the point I just made before. It's a debating House. People will say things that others don't like. Well, it goes for 2 sides. If people are getting upset about the use of a word here or there, unless it is grossly offensive, I don't think the Speaker should be interrupting. But I certainly have not stopped and will not stop people using an appropriate expression for whatever they're talking about in debate.
Speaking to that, sir.
Yeah, okay.
This is not a case of being sensitive. It's not a case of disagreeing with other members. This is a case of getting clarity from you as to how you are interpreting the rules. And I actually, frankly, don't think the suggestion that members seeking clarity from you, as is our rights, applying Speaker's rulings and standing orders, is anything to do with political debate or sensitivity of members.
Well, if it wasn't, it wouldn't have led to this discussion. But I will bring down a ruling first day back after the next recess. The Honourable Willie Jackson.
Mr Speaker, speaking to this point of order, I appreciate that it's a tough position for you, but the angst in terms of particularly our Māori language community is high, because we have an expert in the Māori language in Mr Jones, and we all acknowledge that and concede that, who is questioning the legitimacy of the usage of te reo Māori in the House. That's why we need clear clarification from you on its usage, because I appreciate it's tough when you have an expert for some reason coming out with the nonsense he's coming out with, and we need some clarity, because it's very clear you can use English or Māori. We just want some direction, sir.
Well, for the third time today, can I say that Standing Order 109 stands, hasn't changed, and I'm not changing it. And I doubt that any Standing Orders Committee is going to change it. So there is no question that either language, or of the three options that people have, can be used in this House. Question number 4, Katie Nimmin.
My question is to the Minister of Transport. What announcements has he made regarding resilient transport connections in Hawke's Bay?
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
Oh, Mr Speaker. Last week, I travelled to the mighty Hawke's Bay, thrilled to confirm the government has approved funding to deliver the Waikiri Gorge realignment project, cost of between 350 million and 425 million. This will deliver 4 kilometres of State Highway 2 realignment between Wairoa and Napier, including a 160 metre long arch bridge over the top of the Waikiri Gorge. And it was actually 2 years to the day since Cyclone Gabrielle. I know it's been a tough grind for the people of Wairoa and the East Coast. We are committed to this region and its recovery, and I want to acknowledge the strong advocacy of its fine local MPs.
Supplementary.
Dana Kirkpatrick.
Why is this project so important for the people of the East Coast?
Oh, well, as the member knows, currently the State Highway travels through Peterino and down into the Waikiri Gorge. This has been prone to slips in the past, and the Gorge Bridge was destroyed in Cyclone Gabrielle, severing the connection between Hawke's Bay and Wairoa for a number of months. State Highway 2 connection is critical for the thousands of road users and freight operators who use this corridor every day, and local communities and businesses who've been looking forward to this keenly anticipated project going ahead.
That's right. That's right. Supplementary. What feedback has the Minister received on this announcement?
Oh, Mr Speaker, it's been outstanding feedback. I want to particularly quote Wairoa Mayor Craig Little. Wairoa will be happy. No one knows what this means to us. It's a big one. And Mr Little, His Worship, has been a staunch advocate for this project alongside the local MPs. I do want to acknowledge the persistence and patience of those living, working and travelling through the East Coast. We're looking forward to construction starting on this project as soon as possible.
Well done.
Question 5, the Honourable Willow Jean Prime.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Children. Does she stand by all her statements and actions in relation to serious youth offenders and the military-style academies?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Karen Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, in the context in which they were made at the time. I especially stand by my actions to provide funding of $30.6 million over 4 years to continue the fast-track youth offending program and extend the program to 14 to 17-year-olds, which will contribute to this government's target 3 of a 15% reduction in the total number of children and young people with serious and persistent youth offending.
Supplementary. Are there currently any military-style academy pilot participants missing from the in-community stage of the pilot?
Mr. Speaker, I have said this in the House many times, that I will not be speaking to these young people's day-to-day life activities, that they are a small cohort of young people and that we must respect their privacy.
Supplementary. Is there currently a matter of public safety concerning the military-style academy pilot?
Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't be for me to say whether something is or is not a matter of public safety. This would be a matter for the police, who would make a call on that.
Supplementary. Does she agree with the expert clinical psychologist Brian Dixon's testimony to the Select Committee, who said, quote, "Contrary to popular beliefs in some circles that military-style academy training are an untested panacea, the actual science shows that such approaches are an abject failure, and furthermore, they lead to more and more serious offending. Quite frankly, such experiments are a colossal waste of money, and legislating for more of those is throwing good money after bad," end quote, and if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker, once again, I think we need to get off the fixation of the name of boot camps and actually understand what we're trying to achieve here. These are young people who have repeat serious offences, who continue to come to youth justice residence, and then when their sentence is over, put back into the community, into the same environment that they came from. What we are doing now is making sure we're going to put legislation in place that will allow us to have a more intensive, holistic approach to dealing with these young people.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Has the Minister seen, in terms of independent evaluation, feedback from Fana, that's family, quotes, "My son learned a lot from being part of the MSA program. In the past, when my son had offended, he did not show any accountability for his actions. However, this time my son showed remorse for what he had done. And I am thankful to OT and thankful to the boot camp," end of quotes. Has she seen that evidence?
Mr. Speaker, I would have to say, and to add to that, that I would like to thank every staff member and every person involved that allowed what the Deputy Prime Minister has spoken about just now. These young people need people behind them to support them to be the best that they can be.
Supplementary. Is she confident that any reoffending occurring during the in-community stage of the military-style academy pilot is not more serious reoffending?
Mr. Speaker, I would just like to put this in context. What we were doing before was letting these kids go in and out of these youth justice residences without any support. For young people who received a supervision of residence order in 2022, where a young person is ordered to spend time in a secure youth justice residence, the 1 year offending rate was 75%. 75%, Mr. Speaker. If we can help some of that 75% be better than what they are now, then I'm all for it.
Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
That was an interesting long answer, but my question was, is she confident that the reoffending since the pilot and in community phase is more serious reoffending? She didn't answer that.
Well, she certainly addressed the question. I didn't hear all of it, of course, because there were people to my left who were at some audible volume saying answer the question, so I didn't get the entire answer. I could assume only that the Minister addressed the question.
Supplementary. How can she say that her military-style academy pilot is a success and continue to push through legislation when she is not being transparent about what is really going on?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe I've ever said that the pilot is a success. I've constantly stood here and said it's too early to state whether it's a success or not. It is still a pilot.
Question number 6, Dr. Vanessa Wennick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, the Associate Minister of Defence, what announcements has the government made about defence housing?
The Honourable Chris Peake.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I recently had the pleasure of cutting the ribbon on new soldiers' flats at Papakura military camp, by happy coincidence within the electorate of the Minister of Defence. The project was delivered in an impressive time frame of 6 months, constructed off-site with modular technology. Mr Speaker, this offers an exciting insight into the future of being able to deliver more defence housing and accommodation options on base, and mirrors the work of other ministerial colleagues to more efficiently and affordably procure more classrooms, social housing and so on in the same manner.
Supplementary. Why did the government choose to invest in upgrading the soldiers' flat at Papakura military camp?
Mr Speaker, defence housing is an essential way to support our personnel wearing uniform who serve our country so well. They are posted across New Zealand. Some 1,900 defence homes are more than, many of which, in fact most of which, are more than 60 years old. We know that our soldiers, sailors and aviators deserve better than they have had for very many years in this regard. And I'm sure that the member asking the question, ex-Major Wienink, having experienced those facilities herself, would share my view in that regard.
Supplementary. What is the benefit of improving housing for New Zealand's defence personnel?
Sir, improving defence housing isn't just placing a roof over the head of our Defence Force personnel and their families, important as that is. It's a crucial element in maintaining morale and discipline, which in turn leads to positive outcomes in terms of recruitment and retention that are going to be essential as we ensure that our personnel are well equipped to provide the national security aims and other ways in which our Defence Force is a force for good for New Zealand.
Supplementary. Is this the last defence estate project the government will be investing in?
Mr Speaker, far from it. In fact, it's not even the last defence investment in housing at Papakura military camp. So we have an ambitious program to deliver through the Defence Estate Regeneration Plan. For example, in the next year alone, $180 million worth of procurement of capital projects, again better housing for our personnel and their families, modernised shared spaces like dining halls, and maintenance, of course, for the facilities that we already do have. On top of this, Sir, Budget 2024 delivered an extra $7 million of new operating funding for leasing of defence housing, so that at Devonport Naval Base an additional 35 new houses will support those personnel. I thank all those who have worked hard on these projects over the year. They are coming to fruition under this government.
Question 7, Todd Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Associate Minister of Justice and asks, what changes is the government making in Phase 1 of its anti-money laundering and countering finance of terrorism reform, and how will these changes cut red tape to boost the economy, if at all?
The Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Phase 1 focuses on cutting red tape to reduce compliance costs and grow the economy. The Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Amendment Bill and the Statutes Amendment Bill will together streamline outdated AML requirements, remove duplication and reduce compliance costs with the aim of increasing productivity.
Supplementary. What specific changes are being made through the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Amendment Bill to cut red tape and grow the economy?
Mr Speaker, we are removing mandatory enhanced customer due diligence for low-risk trusts, such as family trusts. Currently, businesses are required to apply the same enhanced customer due diligence processes to all trusts, regardless of the risk. This change will provide relief for reporting entities that will no longer have to collect information for low-risk trusts.
Supplementary. How will changes introduced through the Statutes Amendment Bill tackle unnecessary regulation and encourage growth?
The Statutes Amendment Bill will remove address verification requirements in most cases. Many New Zealanders and businesses are currently required to have their addresses repeatedly verified due to the AML requirements, even if they've used the same bank for many years. This unnecessary regulation wastes time and money and creates barriers for people trying to access basic financial services. Removing these requirements will also help those without a formal address, like dependent children or persons with intellectual disabilities, to open bank accounts more easily.
Supplementary. Can the Minister provide other examples of red tape that's being removed in her phase 1 of her reforms?
One example is the requirement for people to submit a border cash report if they receive cash from someone who has already declared it when entering New Zealand. This is unnecessary red tape, adding no value but creating more work for businesses and individuals. Mr. Speaker, phase 1 of my reforms will remove outdated requirements like this one to save New Zealanders both time and money.
Excellent.
Question 9, question 8, the Honourable Julianne Chenta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transport. Does he stand by his statement about speed limit increases, that it is, quote, safe to do these changes? And if so, what specific evidence has he received, if any, on the impact of reversing speed limit reductions on deaths and serious injuries?
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
Yes. I'm advised the Ministry of Transport undertook an interim regulatory impact analysis to support the new speed rule, which has been released publicly. The Ministry advised it is difficult to accurately model the impact of the rule on deaths and serious injuries.
Does he accept the findings from Wakakotahi's speed monitoring economic assessment undertaken in 2024 that found corridors which had speed limits reduced prevented an average of 27 deaths and serious injuries per corridor each year, with travel time increases of between 12 seconds and 4 minutes?
I'm not overly familiar with the document the member is referring to. All I would say, Mr. Speaker, is that the government is reversing the blanket speed limit lowerings or reductions advocated and pushed forward by the previous government. We sought a mandate for that at the election. We are carrying that out, and it's been broadly popular around the country.
What does he say to Waitaki Bridge resident who said about the reduced speed limit that, quote, the speed limit change was community driven from the very beginning. It was fantastic that the community had managed to see the change happen, and it just seems that it's now become a political issue rather than an actual safety issue.
Mr. Speaker, as the member knows, there are around 50 state highways around the country that are out for further consultation, so that particular resident potentially is able to have their say. We've actually improved the consultation requirements for ongoing speed limit changes as part of the new rule that was set last year, and community voice as part of this process is important.
Will he then allow road controlling authorities, including local councils, to retain safe speed limits where strong community support has already been demonstrated without having to automatically reverse and then consult again?
There's new consultation requirements as part of the new rule, but as the member knows, we are setting a rule particularly around schools that I know the member's been very concerned about, and that is an important change that we're making.
Is he aware that in places like New Plymouth, for example, they've been told that they have to automatically reverse speed limits by July in places where the reductions had 89% community support? And will they have to reverse the speed limit, then spend money consulting again in order to have a speed limit that actually delivers for their communities?
Yes, I've seen the comments from the Mayor of New Plymouth.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. It wasn't a question about whether he'd seen the comments. It was a question about whether that road controlling authority will be able to, whether they will have to reverse speed limits and then consult again, or whether he will consider allowing the community voice to be heard.
Well, that's not what the question was. The question was I aware of the statement? The answer is yes.
Does he have any idea how much it will cost councils to automatically reverse all of the speed limits, then consult again, should they wish to prioritise road safety instead of following his government's direction described by the New Plymouth Mayor as, quote, ideologically driven nonsense with no scientific basis.
The only person who generally advocates for ideological driven nonsense is that member and her comrades in the Green Party.
The member's allocation of questions has expired. Question number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Giantinetti.
To the Minister for Women, does she have confidence that the government is advocating on behalf of and prioritising issues pertaining to women?
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister for Women, yes.
How can she have confidence that the government is prioritising issues pertaining to women when Police Minister Mark Mitchell joked in an interview, "I don't know if a gang member wants to deal with a perimenopausal woman"?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
The look would probably do as an answer, actually.
Let me just say this. We women have put up with a lot. And I know this, that Minister Mitchell is the strongest advocate against the violence that gangs mete out to women that I have seen, and I fully support him in standing up against the gangs. As for his little statement, I'll deal with that later.
Would abolishing the Ministry for Women, as per the next Deputy Prime Minister's campaign wish, help advocate for issues pertaining to women?
Could the member answer that again, please?
Certainly. Would abolishing the Ministry for Women, as per the next Deputy Prime Minister's campaign wish, help advocate for issues pertaining to women?
Well, it depends whether or not the ministry has a great minister, which they do, in the Honourable Nicola Grigg. And I'd also say too is that the coalition agreements are what the government is fulfilling, not every party's campaign promises.
Does she agree with ACT Party leader David Seymour when he said, quote, "The gender pay gap exists when you have to be there late at night to make the sale, put in the extra hours and do all the extra things that women are often unavailable to do because of the way gender roles work," unquote?
Well, I think being one of those women who is always there late at night working, and always have been in my working life, I know that sometimes women do get a very hard time and different treatment. And that's why we stand up for women. And the best thing we can all do is to acknowledge women, stand up for each other, no matter what, and no matter what our political affiliations, which is not something I've always felt from that side of the House.
That might have just saved Mark Mitchell.
Does she think it's appropriate for Parliamentary Under-Secretary Simon Court to tell women what period products to use to save money?
But you know, I think it's amazing because I don't need to worry about those sorts of things anymore, and I'm just so grateful for the fact that this man is actually interested in it, because I sure as hell am not.
How can she have confidence the government is advocating for women when her colleagues mock perimenopausal women, dismiss the causes for the gender pay gap, appoint an anti-abortion lobbyist as the Minister for Health, and tell women what to put in their vagina? And why has she, as the Minister for Women, stood by and done nothing?
Well, I'll tell you what, that question is seriously going to affect my reading of answers that are given in the House from this point on. The Honourable Judith Collins.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. What a stupid question. And the last thing we need is for women in this House to be belittling other members of Parliament who are trying to do their job. Just stand up for women when they ask you to.
Thank you. We'll just we'll now wait for complete silence. And I call Maria Meno Kapakingi.
Tēnā koe te pika, tēnā tātou katoa te whare. My questions are to the Minister for Children. Does she stand by all her statements and actions?
The Honourable Karen Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, in the context in which they were made at the time. Mr. Speaker, especially my statement that the best interests and the safety of our children should be first and foremost in all decision-making of our young people.
Supplementary. Does she stand by her decision to remove mandatory family group conferences for youth classified as young serious offenders, despite the fact that 80% of rangatahi likely to receive this classification are Māori and will be the most in need of input from whānau, hapu and iwi?
Mr. Speaker, I am a real big fan of family group conferences and the intention of why family group conferences were brought in the first place. I want to go back to the true intention of why those FGCs were brought about in the first place, not it becoming a tick box exercise for judges to hold up the court system and allow kids to be on remand for up to 12 months at a time because of FGCs.
Supplementary. Is she determined to isolate mokopono Māori in the system for their whakapapa genealogy, with the removal of mandatory family group conferences and the repeal of Section 7AA of Oranga Tamariki Act?
Mr. Speaker, we will not be removing family group conferences. What we're saying is making sure that a family group conference is done right in the first place, rather than having to have repeated family group conferences with no outcomes and not being done in the way that they were intended to be done.
Supplementary. Does the Minister want to see a reduction in the number of tamariki Māori in care?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. That's why I'm really proud of some of the 4 of the 9 partners that are now operationalised within this country, showing positive results. For example, far fewer tainui tamariki entered care and protection in 2023 compared to 2019, and it was a 61% reduction, all because we worked together for our young people.
Supplementary. Would the $260,000 spent per child on these boot camps have been better spent on expanding the Ka Ora Ka Ako Healthy School Lunches program to help prevent our tamariki from offending in the first place?
Mr. Speaker, the money that we are investing in these young people is to help them to be accountable for the crimes that they've committed. They have left victims behind within the community, and there needs to be accountability for that. But it is also about making sure that we rehabilitate these young people to lessen the chance of victims in our community and also give these kids a better chance at life.
Question 11, Nancy Liu.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Mental Health. What recent announcements has he made regarding funding from the Mental Health and Addiction Community Sector Innovation Fund for the Mental Health Foundation?
The Honourable Aotearoa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was thrilled to recently announce that the Mental Health Foundation is the latest recipient of the Government's Mental Health and Addiction Community Sector Innovation Fund. This funding has been matched by the Mental Health Foundation to fully fund Project Wakapuawai, initiative that will digitise more mental health resources to allow Kiwis faster access to mental health information and support. This funding will allow for the Mental Health Foundation to redevelop and future-proof its digital platforms to improve the ways they provide crucial information about mental health, well-being, suicide prevention and mental distress for all New Zealanders.
Supplementary. Why is it important to digitise mental health resources?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this government knows that access to information and support for our rural and remote communities remains a barrier, so online resources such as this is another option for those looking to support themselves or someone they care about. If you're on a farm in Northland or a tiny town in southern New Zealand, we know your access to mental health support can be limited. We want every Kiwi to know help is close, and this goes some way to achieving that.
Supplementary. What other contracts have been announced as a result of the Mental Health and Addiction Community Sector Innovation Fund?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Mental Health Foundation is the fourth contract to be awarded so far from the first round of the Mental Health Innovation Fund. The other three recipients are Youthline, the Sir John Kirwan Foundation and Mates in Construction. Youthline will receive funding to expand its Counselling Your Way program. The Sir John Kirwan Foundation will receive funding to scale up Mighty, a free early intervention initiative to support children's mental health. Mates in Construction will receive funding for its community workplace-based program. These are only the first three recipients, and I'm excited to share more recipients in the future.
Supplementary.
The Honourable, Ingrid Leary.
Does the Minister regret ignoring advice from his own officials that funding this initiative out of health funds would lead to workforce shortages when thousands more people have now been locked out of specialist mental health services due to workforce shortages?
Well, Mr Speaker, the question is, do I regret not following official advice? Advice not to spend money that was stuck in Wellington and send it out to the front line with organisations like Youthline, Mates in Construction, the Mental Health Foundation. I know what the public wants me to do, Mr Speaker, and also the member raised the question about the workforce. The Auditor-General, in its damning report of the last government, said there was no mental health workforce plan. This government's delivered New Zealand's first mental health workforce plan within baseline budget, so it shows you can actually do both.
Nancy Lou.
How does the Mental Health and Addiction Community Sector Innovation Fund support New Zealanders access timely mental health support?
Well, Mr Speaker, the government is focused on not only growing and improving the performance of our existing frontline services, but we're also growing and developing new frontline mental health and addiction workforces. I think it's fantastic that the Innovation Fund is supporting our frontline mental health workforce and enabling more Kiwis to get faster access to timely mental health support. This fund is part of the government's commitment of investing more in grassroots initiatives. We came into government, Mr Speaker, to say we'd get more money out of Wellington to the front line, and that's what we've done.
The Honourable Shane Jones.
And on the point of mental health, can the Minister explain to the House what happened to the $1.2 billion under Jacinda Ardern's government?
Well, Mr Speaker, what I can do is point...
1.9.
Question 12. Yeah?
Well, can I ask the Minister, putting it this way, is there a present series of policies that have learned from the fact that the 1.2 billion ended up with 5 hospital beds?
Reflected coming into government on the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission report on the last government that said despite the 1.9 billion announced for mental health, it had made no material difference, which showed it was less about just tagging money and making announcements, but actually getting money out the door to new services, and that's what we've announced today.
That's enough. Thank you. The Honourable Priyanka Radhakrishnan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Disability Issues. Does she stand by her statement that, quote, the government is focused on delivering services and supports that meet the needs of disabled people, their carers, their family and carers, both now and into the future, end quote? If not, why not?
Speaker.
The Honourable Shane Beatty.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes, there has been a record investment of $1.1 billion over 5 years to address demand and cost pressures on the support service. The government has taken urgent steps to stabilise the disability support system. Work is well underway to implement the recommendations of the independent review. Included in this are NASCs that have budgets greater than their spending in the last financial year, ensuring that there continues to be places available in residential care for those with the greatest need.
How can she stand by her statement when doctors are saying that intellectually disabled people are unable to transition into residential care facilities they were approved for because of her government's freeze on new placements?
Mr Speaker, the residential component of NASC budgets is larger than in the previous budget, and I am advised that there is not a freeze on new entries into residential care.
How is she supporting disabled people when psychiatrists are saying that people with severe difficulties who were admitted into hospital are no longer able to go home or into residential facilities due to the freeze and are instead stuck in psych wards?
Mr Speaker, as I said in my previous question, I'm advised that there is not a freeze on new entries into residential care.
Does she agree with doctors and nurses who recently wrote in the New Zealand Medical Journal that her freeze is causing unnecessary severe harm to those with an intellectual disability and their families and carers?
Mr Speaker, what I agree with is other phrases in the Medical Journal that said pending commissioning and completion of detailed and urgent review of the contract and pricing models, which is currently underway.
In the meantime, people suffer.
How is cutting the funding package of an autistic 8-year-old child with complex needs by almost 50%, despite the child's needs not changing, meeting the needs of disabled people, especially when the family was told the cut was because of her government's directive to NASCs to reduce spending?
Mr Speaker, I'm advised that NASCs need to prioritise their indicative budgets towards those in the highest needs. NASCs hold responsibility for determining whether someone meets eligibility for DSS support, and secondly, what that support looks like.
How can she possibly expect New Zealanders to believe that there is no freeze when disabled people, family, carers, doctors, and a document from her own ministry all say there is?
Mr Speaker, the $1.1 billion increase in funding over 5 years in Budget 2024 is a good indication of our support for the disabled sector.
No, it's not. No, it's
That concludes oral questions. I'll just take 20 seconds while those who need to leave the House do so. Quietly. Yeah, quietly without the discussions on the way through. I call on the Honourable Chris Bishop.
Mr Speaker, following discussion at Business Committee, I seek leave to move the motion in my name on the table to adopt the sessional order for permission to be absent on Thursday for return home.
Is there any objection to that course being followed? There is none. The Honourable Chris Bishop.
I move that the House adopt the sessional order permission to be absent on Thursday for return home. Mr Speaker, this is, I'm seeing people raising their hands in thumbs up agreement, so I don't intend to take too much more of the House's time. It's been agreed with the Business Committee, allow a bit more flexibility for members returning home on a Thursday.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. Call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Overseas Investment, Build to Rent and Similar Rental Developments Amendment Bill, third reading.
The Honourable Chris Bishop.
I move that the Overseas Investment, Build to Rent and Similar Rental Developments Amendment Bill be now read a third time. Mr Speaker, this bill amends the Overseas Investment Act to create a streamlined pathway for overseas investment in existing build-to-rent developments. It addresses a key concern of build-to-rent developers that they need certainty they'll be able to on-sell their developments. Given the size and complexity of these assets, this can be challenging when limited to the domestic market. Mr Speaker, the build-to-rent sector does have significant potential, and I think it was yesterday we were talking in the committee stage of the House about just how much potential that is. I was intrigued to get an email overnight, in fact it might have come in this morning actually, from someone who was following the debate, committee stage debate last night, and specifically wanted to email me to say that she'd heard the question from the Honourable Julianne Genter to me in the committee stage debate, and I think the question was how many build-to-rent developers have been turned down through the existing benefit to New Zealand test, and I didn't know what the answer was, and neither did the officials, but I'm advised by one of the top lawyers working in the area that the answer is actually substantial. There is substantial interest in this bill passing and a number of people following it because they're quite interested in doing that, but the existing test is a barrier. So that actually, perhaps a day later, directly addresses the question from the member. So there is interest out there in this. Now, I'm not going to pretend it's the answer to New Zealand's housing woes, as various members in the House who've been housing ministers know, and housing spokespeople. There's no one silver bullet, because if there was, we would have fired it by now. But what we need to do is make a whole series of changes, and build to rent's part of it. Since medium to large scale residential housing developments, it's a small proportion of the market, but has the potential to play a much bigger role. If you look at the UK, for example, there's 240,000 build to rent homes in 2022 in the UK. There's similar success in the US and parts of Europe. Often what you see with build to rent, sir, is longer leases to tenants, making them a popular choice for tenants or for renters looking for secure long-term housing. This is a small and important contribution. What the bill does is create a streamlined pathway within the Overseas Investment Act. Under the current rules, overseas investors into build to rent have a streamlined pathway to develop new housing, but they can only purchase established housing developments if they meet the onerous benefit to New Zealand test. So they don't have certainty, therefore they'll be able to sell their assets when they're complete or if they face financial distress. International investment is critical in this sector because these are large and complex assets. And internationally, institutional investors such as pension funds are big players in the sector. They can provide stable returns over an extended period of time. So the pathway addresses this issue, gives developers certainty they need. The streamlined pathways in the Act have specific criteria or thresholds to ensure they're used appropriately. In this case, the new pathway enables investors to purchase established large-scale rental developments in circumstances where there are one or more buildings which total at least 20 dwellings. They must also continue to make at least 20 dwellings available for rent. When we had a bit of a debate in the committee stage of the House about whether or not at least or more than was the same thing. Lawrence, Mr Hernan from the Greens struggled to get there, but we got there in the end. And that is indeed the case. So they must continue to make at least 20 dwellings available for rent, and they may use an intermediary to lease their build-to-rent developments, which is likely to be a common business model. There was a change at the Select Committee. I want to thank the Finance and Expenditure Committee for their work. The new test was designed to enable the use of intermediaries. The existing test that supports investors building new housing does not appear to. So you could have had build-to-rent developers who built 200 new dwellings being forced to sell those because they wanted to contract a property manager. So thank you to the committee for sorting that out. There's been quite a bit of goodwill on the committee, and we have taken some comments from the opposition in relation to some amendments, which I did take some advice on, and as we had an extended discussion on the committee stage last night, not proceeding with those amendments at this time, but we'll keep a watching brief on the issue and thank the constructive comments from the opposition in relation to that. Mr Speaker, international investment is essential for growth. We have low capital intensity relative to other developed economies. We do need international capital to bring in expertise, connections and just capital. This bill is just one small way the government is supporting high quality international investment, and of course the Honourable David Seymour is working hard on the Overseas Investment Act changes, very important for the future of the New Zealand economy. So this bill creates a streamlined pathway. It's one small change, but we do need broader reforms as well, of course. Mr Speaker, it's been a pleasure to take this bill through. I want to thank everyone for supporting it. I think it's going to pass almost unanimously. It's a small contribution to fixing our housing crisis, and of course there's always more to do. Thank you.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Kira McAnulty.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the Labor Party supports this bill, but we wouldn't support the bill if it went any further. It's a pretty specific proposal, and it is backed up by a pretty sound argument. The build-to-rent as an asset class was quite a significant inclusion under the previous Labor government, and it's good to see this government is building on that. It will play a part in ensuring that there are suitable options for those that need a home, which is pretty much all of us. The thing though, Mr Speaker, is that we should never give up on the dream of people being able to buy their own homes. And so we don't ever want to look like, as a parliament, that we are saying to people, look, we will support this, but that's your lot. Look, you can stay there for a long time, but you'll always be a renter. The sad reality is, for a lot of people, that is what they face. We should never give up on that. But in this instance, it's clear that build to rent does play a part. What will be interesting is any subsequent proposals around the change to overseas investment in existing property. Because in this instance, the rationale made sense, at least, that those that were looking to invest and specifically build to rent developments were being restricted because those potential buyers for some of them were from overseas, and so they didn't have the confidence to build in the first place. Now, if we want this to work, we don't want there to be a lack of confidence in investing in such developments. Will the government look to extend that to existing properties is the question. Now, if they do, we will strongly oppose that, because if we see what we've seen previously, in that the residential market gets unaffordable, then the only option they will have is rentals. And we need to avoid that, and part of that is disincentivising competition on existing stock. This government has done that by reversing the interest deductibility rules back to where they were, and already we have seen the number of consents for new builds fall, and we have seen the level of lending to investors increase. So already there is increased competition on existing stock. But in this instance, there was a case. And so therefore, we agree. And so I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the work that Dr. Megan Woods did when she was Housing Minister in encouraging build to rents in this country. I think she can be really proud of that. I want to touch on something the Minister said in his contribution. He was very vague about it. And I think he's very vague about it because he knows deep down we have a point, and for whatever reason he chose not to pursue it. But I think it was a missed opportunity, the fact that he didn't. The threshold for this bill to kick in is 20 units. So regardless of the size of the development, as long as 20 remain build to rent, then they would qualify for the provisions, if you like, within this bill. That is fine. We're comfortable with that. It's consistent with what's been in the past. But what was disappointing was just the sheer unwillingness from the minister, officials, frankly, and some other members to really dive into this. Disappointing because I think that areas outside the large urban centres, let's say Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga, Wellington, Christchurch, a 20-unit development is massive. And you might see even an 8 or 10-unit development is quite a large one relative to their area. Well, they will never have the benefit from this bill. And I think we're unlikely to see build to rent become a feature outside of our largest cities. And that is a shame, because why should the regions miss out? And all they needed to do was to look at a two-tier system, that the 20-unit minimum applied in the cities and a proportional threshold outside of that. So as long as it's above 6 and 100%, so that we don't get gaming of the system, it has to be specific build to rent development, but just as a smaller size. And then we'll see your Nelsons and we'll see your Whited Uppers benefit from this as well. But we're not. Now the minister says, oh, don't worry about it, we'll revisit it at 3 years' time. Why? Why couldn't we have just done it now? But anyway, look, it's done now. It's on. I've got that grizzle out of the way. I've put it on the record. We tried to help the regions. The government didn't want to. It's there on the record. That's fine. People will benefit from this. The Labor Party supports this. It makes sense to go through. That support won't extend to any further loosening of the overseas investment rules. It'll be very interesting if what we're hearing, that they're looking to loosen those for properties 5 million and over. We'll be keeping an eye and an ear out for that. Because once you open that door, it's all on. At least this is limited to a specific asset class that doesn't then move on to the residential property market, because if doing so, that would be disastrous. But this bill makes sense, and that's why we support it.
The Honourable Julian Genter.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. Housing is a human right. We in this Parliament have a responsibility to ensure that the policies that we put in place are leading to a situation where every person has access to secure, affordable housing that's safe, makes sense for it to be energy efficient. That affects human health as well as energy use. This bill, as the Minister himself said, isn't really going to make a massive difference one way or the other. And let me be very clear, the Green Party support build to rent, and we think there should be incentives in place to ensure we get high quality build to rent homes. And we don't believe that owning a home has to be the pathway for people to get access to have safe, secure, affordable housing. We need better renter protections, and most of all, the thing that would make the biggest difference to the housing crisis in this country, and we know this from looking at other countries who actually have achieved more affordable and secure housing for people, that there is a really important role for the public sector, whether that's at a central government level or at local level, in the provision, in building and supplying public housing. That has to be a major part of it. And for whatever benefit the government thinks it's going to get through this technical change, the Overseas Investment Act, which means that actually build to rent as a specific asset class can be invested in not only by foreign investors, but can be sold, whether by people who are foreign investors to other foreign investors, or it can be sold by domestic investors and builders to foreign investors. That's what this bill's doing. Just makes it a little bit easier to do that. It's not going to address the severe shortage in housing supply that has been now worsened by the existing government cancelling all the planned builds from Aotearoa. And Aotearoa was just ramping up to the point where it was going to be able to deliver. Really important to have a large public sector for public good player in the development space. Just in my own electorate of Rongotai alone, I talked to a builder who said they had $70 million worth of new builds, redevelopment of public land that would have supplied more homes into Rongotai, cancelled now by the existing government. So that affects the building and construction sector. That's why, in part, Engineering New Zealand came out earlier this week and said hundreds of engineers have lost their jobs and are leaving New Zealand. That is a direct consequence of this coalition government's actions, because they are ideologically opposed to something that is demonstrated to be practical and the right way to help achieve affordable housing. Not to mention the fact that at the same time they say, okay, we're going to do build to rent, and we're going to make it easier for foreign investors to invest and sell to other foreign investors, build to rent housing. They are taking away protections for renters, bringing back no cause evictions. Where is the security in that for renters? Nowhere. So if we don't have proper protection for renters, increasing the supply of rental properties isn't necessarily going to provide the affordable, secure housing that we need. That's the truth. And that's why, if you look at other developed countries that have much better outcomes than us on a whole range of issues, they have much better protection for renters. They have a higher proportion of their population renting, because it's not a bad thing. Because you can have a secure home and have some agency over what the home looks like. You can actually determine, it's like a permanent home, because there's protection for renters, because it makes sense as a society to ensure that everybody has a healthy, affordable home. Stop with your moralistic. This government is very, very much like, punish the poor, blame them for all their problems, don't do anything to actually help people. That's the reality. And every problem that we face in society, rather than actually investing in our country ourselves, is let's sell it off. Let's sell it off to the foreigners. Let's get some more money from the foreigners. Let's get some foreign capital. Guess what? When people from other countries who have money come and invest in infrastructure in our country, whether that's roads or whether that's housing, they expect a return for it. The way, on the one hand, They're like, in their personal lives, they know that they retain autonomy and build wealth by buying homes and owning their own home. But as a governing on behalf of the country, they're like, let's just sell it all off to foreign investors and put future New Zealanders on the hook to pay back at high interest rates the cost of providing that infrastructure. So, you know, the Green Party's not going to support this bill. We have real solutions that will actually address the supply of housing, and we come from the point of view of care for our community. Care, and that's what everyone in this house should be doing, really. I mean, we're here to represent all New Zealanders. Not just the top 1%, not just the wealthy and sordid like the Prime Minister. And we're not here to line the pockets of foreign investors when we ourselves could be investing in rental properties, where we could be resourcing our councils to build council housing. There was an inquiry into the future of Auckland's governance way back, you know, 2008, 9, 10, a Royal Commission came back, and it made it very clear that actually there's a really important role at the local level for councils to be involved in social housing. And that's strongly evidence-based. But we have now several decades of a legacy of the pressure for councils to sell that off. Even under the last Labour majority government, they put the Wellington Council in the invidious position of having to transfer council housing into a CHIP in order to access the income-related rent subsidy, which private landlords, you know, private providers of rental properties can access. Why shouldn't our local communities be able to do that through council housing? And there's not a country in the world that has become a successful country with high levels of well-being for the people, with health for their people, who've done it through privatization, foreign investment, tax cuts for landlords, tax cuts for the rich. You do it by investing in all the people, because the people are our greatest resource. And we bear the brunt of it when there are households with children where parents are working, they're in poverty, they're in insecure housing, they're in unhealthy housing, they can be booted out of their rental property for no good reason. And then the people who own those rental properties are able to benefit from the lower interest rates to, leverage more debt and buy more property, and property prices go up. And it leads to more inequality in the society. But we pay for it, we all pay for it, and we'll pay for it because higher child poverty levels, insecure housing for children, children living in poverty when their parents are working, that is not good for us. That is what leads to more crime. That is what leads to us having bigger bills in terms of our health system. You know, everybody knows the health system is under enormous pressure, in no insignificant part caused by road crashes, which will be made worse under changes by this government, but also because people live in unhealthy housing, and then we suffer with rheumatic fever, preventable childhood illnesses. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. But the reason the coalition government, well, one, they just seem incapable of understanding evidence, doing basic math, and understanding that what is best for the wealthiest individual is not necessarily best for the collective, for the group, for all of us in the country. And the way that we, as a society, become better off is that we look after each other. We make sure that those who are the most vulnerable are looked after, and in the end, we will benefit because those kids will grow up healthy and able to be their best selves and contribute more back to the society. We're not paying the big health bills because if we put people in healthy, secure, warm, dry housing and secure housing, we don't have as many emergency department admissions, we don't have as many chronic diseases, we don't have as much asthma. It just makes sense. But the government comes here and says, yeah, well, we don't think public housing, there's no silver bullet, but we're going to tweak some tiny things around the edges. Our real agenda is making it easier for foreign investors to make a buck off New Zealand.
Cameron Luxon.
Mr Speaker, look, no one in this House is denying that New Zealand has got a massive housing problem, sometimes called a housing crisis. And I think what we just heard is a complete fairy tale for how that could actually be. When you have, as the previous speaker alluded to, house prices going up, becoming more unaffordable, that's an incentive for people to build. Yes. People actually want to build and deliver housing. The real problem that we have in New Zealand is we have just harsh and unworkable, sometimes unmovable, and designed to say no legislation and problems in this country that this government is working incredibly hard on addressing. Things like reforming the RMA and doing things like allowing products to be brought into New Zealand to build our houses, as Minister Pink is shepherding through the House quite well. That will lead to more houses being built, and I hope that this bill, Mr Speaker, will contribute to allowing another piece of the puzzle, which is capital. We need capital to pay for subbies, to pay for builders, to pay for drapes, curtains, underfloor. We need that money to actually purchase the good. And yes, there's a return because someone's putting something up and they need a return. So when you actually provide the capital as people who save and work and put it away for a rainy day and want to get a return on it do, as we all do with what we've put away, those people deserve to get a return. And that's the sort of thing that people want when they invest in something like a build to rent. So on one side you get people providing capital and getting a return, on the other side you get long-term stable rentals, which, as the previous speaker has talked about, is something that we want to see in this country. Our system disincentivises investment from overseas, Mr Speaker, in a lot of ways. This bill, and yes it is for one asset class, will do a lot to increase the interest in investing in the things that New Zealand needs to house our population. It's creating a streamlined pathway for overseas investors to purchase already existing large-scale rental developments. Look, this government, this coalition government, is working on broad changes to the Overseas Investment Act, as I've already said. ACT has pushed for this for a long time. I'm glad to see this happening. I think it's going to address concerns that have been bubbling away in the community about, stable housing for people who need a rental community with a professional. There's a lot of concern about having professional property managers and professional businesses. This is what we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker. Professional companies employing professionals to house people that maybe couldn't find it somewhere else or want to have something that is a long-term customer relationship rather than what we have historically done in this country. Look, I just want to reiterate the point that I made in my first speech, my second reading speech, Mr. Speaker. Fixing the housing crisis that we have in New Zealand is not an easy task. There is so many different elements that flow into it, as I just outlined, planning, infrastructure, the way we deliver services to places where we want to build, what we use to build, the skills we need to maintain in this country and grow. All of these things take a lot of getting right to get that whole soup together so that you can have a delicious boil up at the end of the day. And this is what this government's working on, getting all those ingredients in the right place so that we can get a housing situation in New Zealand that means New Zealanders and people who want to become New Zealanders can see somewhere that they can not only invest their capital but invest their life, Mr. Speaker, somewhere they can see a stable future for their families, a stable future for their businesses and their lives and their careers, so that everybody in this big boat we call New Zealand or Aotearoa, this big boat, we all are paddling in the same direction. We all feel like we have a place here, and New Zealanders can look at their country with pride when we have the places to house New Zealanders. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Call on Andy Foster.
Look, I think we all agree that there is a housing shortage. What we seem to disagree, certainly from the speech over from the Green Party, is what the solution to that might be. And look, it's always a pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to follow particular housing issues after Cameron Luxon, who, of course, I think is probably the only person who's actually built houses with his own hands. So he is our resident builder.
No, sorry. You've got to be accurate if you're going to start making those sort of statements.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Okay, sometimes we flush hidden talents out of the House when we make statements like that, which need to be corrected. But look, look, I know we have people who contribute parts of the House anyway. So, But, Mr Speaker, look, I first of all want to start off with the green solution, which seems to be, look, let's go down the public housing track. And when Julianne Genter stood up and said, well, look, Aotearoa, public housing was the answer to everything. And she said, well, it's $70 million. And said, well, how many houses? How many houses? How many houses? Didn't get a reply from her at any stage on that. Now, I can bet you bottom dollar, the problem with those is they were inordinately expensive. And when I saw, when I was the Mayor of Wellington, I saw KO projects, most of them were sitting around $900,000 to $1 million for the building, probably excluding the land, and that is for a, 1, 2, maybe 3 if you're lucky, room house. Very, very expensive. So clearly they were getting the model wrong. So this bill, Mr Speaker, Madam Speaker now, Madam Speaker, is just, you won't correct me, will you, on whether you built a house or not? You weren't here in that bit. But Madam Speaker, this bill is just a small part of the answer to a very big, complicated problem. What it does is it just opens a new pathway for foreign investors to be able to build or buy new housing, long-term housing for rental purposes, where you have 20 or more dwellings all in one place or contiguous. That's not a big part of the market, but it's an important part. It doesn't say they have to build them, but what it does tend to do is make it more likely that a developer in New Zealand might build something knowing they've got more likelihood of being able to sell it to an international investor or indeed to a New Zealand investor. So it streamlines the investment process. But look, Madam Speaker, I want to talk a little bit about the reasons we have a housing shortage. And there are two parts of it. One is supply, one's demand. And obviously supply has gone up and down a little bit in terms of the amount that's been built over time. In the last little while, in fact, it was pretty obvious what was going to happen during the COVID situation, is that interest rates went through the roof, the cost of building went through the roof, and house prices, which peaked, then suddenly plummeted. Now, in that situation, are you going, as a developer, going to build a house? And the answer is probably not, because you can't make money on it. And the reality is that unless you are going to step in, as the Green Party suggested, and just have the public sector throw enormous amounts of money at housing, regardless of what the cost of it is, and that seemed to be the model that KO was operating under, the market is going to decide when it's going to build and when it's not going to build, and obviously they backed off in that situation. The other part that I wanted to mention is the demand side, and the reality is that over many, many years, we've had, well, the last decade or so, COVID aside, we've had very, very significant population growth, and that now is no longer driven by New Zealand births over deaths. It is driven very much by migration. And one of the things that has always irritated me, I might say, is that we've had governments, successive governments, both Labor and national governments, saying to councils, we want you to provide for 30 years of population growth in terms of housing. And given that most of that now is migration driven, who's in charge of that? Who's in charge of that? Well, it's not the councils, it's the government. And so the government needs to have some sort of clarity around what sort of level of population growth there is going to be. And it was interesting, and I've said this before in this House, that the Infrastructure Commission, who thank heavens, as a responsible organisation, are now saying that we need a population demographic strategy for the country, because if you don't have that, how many houses do you need, what sort of infrastructure do you need, how many schools, how many hospitals, all of those things, the absence of that becomes a real problem. And what they said about stats, because we rely on stats for these sort of things about the projections, they said that stats are, quote, flying blind. Because they don't know, because they've got to put the estimates on the basis of essentially past practice, but they don't know what future practice is going to be, and because neither does the government. And that doesn't matter whether it's the government on that side or the government on this side. So we need to do a lot better in that place, Madam Speaker. But go back to supply. This is about providing another avenue for supply of houses. And now, New Zealand First has always been very wary of foreign investment in New Zealand. What we want to do is to make sure that where there is foreign investment in New Zealand, it is the benefit of New Zealand. That's what we're about. New Zealand First, it's about the benefit to New Zealand, not about the benefit to foreign investors. And so we've always been a little bit wary about that. But what we want to do is make sure that it is a good benefit. And so if you're going to buy something, what's that benefit going to be? Now, I know we heard mention of, I think, Kieran McAnulty saying that, there's a suggestion that maybe $5 million might be the sort of price at which somebody might be able to buy a house in New Zealand. Well, I'm not aware of that as being a definite proposition. But I would say, and I think our view will be, is that if you're going to buy a house, it's got to be something that doesn't compete with the New Zealand market. $5 million probably does that. But $2 million, which was a suggestion, of course, around, from the National Party, was one that New Zealand First said no, because you are then starting to compete with New Zealand homeowners. And it was interesting, actually. I had a quick look last week at the number of houses which are $2 million plus, which were listed on Trade Me. I did cherry pick here. In Wellington, and the property market in Wellington has been obviously pretty terrible recently, 3 to 3.5% of the 3,249 listings were 2 million or above. In Auckland, 15,196 listings, approximately 12% of them were 2 million or above. All could be quite close to 2 million, and there'd be a whole lot more there. And in Queenstown Lakes, it was 45% of the 469 listings. So my point is, in some parts of the country, that 2 million, it becomes a real competition with New Zealand buyers. And the other part of that, of course, is that what it would tend to encourage is if you were thinking about listing it just under 2 million, you might just go, I'll push it up a little bit so that I might get a foreigner buying it as well. So that is a real issue. But the 5 million, if I might return to the 5 million, Madam Speaker, and I think we would probably be very strong on this, is you don't just want to sell a house, you want to sell to somebody who's got a lot of money. You want to sell something to someone who's also going to invest significantly in this country, in productive development, in building new businesses, expanding businesses, and employing Kiwis, because that's the really important thing. But let's just focus again on this bill to rent. Is it going to make a difference? It will make a difference at the margins. We've seen that there is a growing market in other jurisdictions, the US, Europe, etc. Will that be as bigger benefit here? At the moment, I think the Property Council said that at the moment our build-to-rent market is very small. It's about 0.1% of the overall market. They think if the policy settings are favourable, within a decade it could be 25,000 dwellings. Sounds quite a lot, but it's still only 1% of the market. So it's still relatively small, and I suspect the reason for that is that those bigger markets, Australia, UK, Europe and the United States, they've got a big domestic investment in this. We don't. And so it's likely still to remain a relatively modest contribution. But I just want to finish off finally with some comments on the minority reports. So Labor has been, I think Labor said they support this proposition. Good. They're quite clearly trying to differentiate themselves somehow. So, we've got the idea of having some different number. Kieran McAnulty said a proportional number. But I don't know how you do a proportional number when Auckland's a lot bigger than Wellington's, bigger than Christchurch, New Plymouth, and I don't know, Masterton are very different sizes. So it would be complicated. You might choose another arbitrary level, which is, I guess, what he was suggesting. Yeah, okay. But I think what I'd say is let's just try what we've got at the moment. And let's see how it goes. And if it goes well, maybe have a look at that going forward. And that seems to be where we're at the moment. But it was the Greens, to me, Madam Speaker, who were really confused, because what they're effectively saying is we've got enough money in this country to build all the houses that we need. I don't know where that money's coming from, because at the same time they want a capital gains tax, they want to punish rental property owners, so they're going to disincentivise people from building houses. So I do not know which magic money tree, other than the state, they seem to want to raid to be able to build the houses that this country needs. Madam Speaker, this bill is simply a small contribution amongst a range of complex contributions to fixing a big problem for this country in terms of housing, and I commend this bill to the House.
Speaker.
I call Mariamino Kapakini.
Tēnā koe. Madam Speaker, unlike Cameron Luxton, who is actually a builder, I'm not a builder, but just before I started this job, I built 16 homes in a tiny little place in the very far north, and I want to relate it to this bill. We built 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom homes on a piece of dirt in Te Kao. By building the homes, we then had to put a new road in. By putting the new road in, then we had to put in a brand new water treatment system. And this in the context of under community development thinking, marae-centric thinking. So all of this development happened because the community and the marae community decided we need homes, and by the way, we know how to do this. So our tribe contributed to that investment, and Kāinga Ora also contributed to that investment. So we got on. Now, and the bigger context of this is managing around 4,000 hectares of farmland. So we've got a truckload of farmland up in Te Kao. This is Opodi land. 3,000 bulls. A little mussel farm just down the way in Hohora. We put in 565 water tanks. So what I'm describing here is the context of it is not just about the house. It is about the community in which one resides. And so it's one of the most, when I'm thinking and I'm reading this bill, which I'd like to support, but we're not quite there yet. Madam Speaker, I know. I know. We should talk more. But it is important because it is about the significance of community design, consultation, and development. That's the position I want to bring into this discussion. Might be a wee bit late, but nevertheless, here it is. So from our perspective, and this essence of this bill, yes, it does remove barriers for overseas investors to build to rent, but what it does then is replace the barrier and put it smack in front of hapu and whānau and tribal iwi investors. That's what it does. It doesn't, in my view, and in our view, look closely and understand enough the context of which I've just described in my opening context. The barrier is replaced squarely in front of Māori. So in introducing what can only be described as a golden ticket for foreign entities to farm us for money, land and prosperity. I know, it does make people go, I know, but stick with me. I use the term golden ticket purposefully, right? I'm not, you will all recognise that I use words really clearly. There's not an accident in the way I describe our reality. Right, I'll start again. I use the term golden ticket purposefully, understanding that in the context of this coalition government's overall policy platform, this bill cannot be viewed in isolation of a wider machine. And the previous speaker talked about, well, it's a small contribution to a whole big network of things. That's the bit we can simply not trust. I know. It's okay, no, hang in there, we're good. It's Thursday, stick with me. Madam Speaker, if it wasn't already grim, I'm going to say it again, if it wasn't already grim for whānau to buy their own homes now, allowing overseas competitors to buy whenua and build rentals will make it more difficult, clearly. Now just register that for our mokopuna to own homes in their future. The smoke screen here is that this will assist with the rental shortage here at home. It's go, no, Maria Mino, we're going to get more. I mean, really, this is good for you. Go with us. We are a nation of renters because the housing market is so inaccessible. So what do? Their best answer, government's best answer is to sell our whenua to overseas investors and build more prisons and set up boot camps. Thank you for the housing strategy. So, here we go, 30 seconds. We simply cannot support this, Madam Speaker. We'd like to be able to, but it doesn't do enough and it doesn't understand us enough. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Lawrence Zuna.
I enjoyed that.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to tautoko my previous speaker, but also the Honourable Julianne Genter in opposing this bill on behalf of the Green Party. Now, understandably, this bill is to remove barriers for overseas investment in build-to-rent housing. And I'll talk more about our housing crisis in a bit. But in terms of the bill itself, let's first discuss what has happened during the committee stage. And I would like to point out, and also my appreciation to the Minister for answering our questions diligently during the committee stage. That is much appreciated when that does happen. But if you're looking at the policy statement, Madam Speaker, we can talk about the nuance in terms of some of the things that we mentioned in the committee stage around the exemptions when it comes to the Overseas Investment Act, the complexity of that act itself, and the kind of sort of exemptions and allowances that this bill has to make in order to make that particular act work or to make this particular exemption work, as well as in terms of our international obligations through either our free trade agreements or our comprehensive economic partnership agreements, FTA or CEPA. However, Madam Speaker, the basis of this bill is that we want to see more rental properties or more housing that is affordable for people of Aotearoa. And does this bill serve that purpose? The bill itself is simply to buy existing large rental development, not in terms of creating or increasing the stock of the rental market, but the existing ones. I think that fundamentally is one of the barriers or the challenges that we see with this bill is what is the actual likelihood of us increasing the housing stock, other than simply passing the issue from one party to another. Madam Speaker, when we are looking at this, and one of the things that did come up during the committee stage, and I think the Honourable Julianne Genter was very accurate when it comes to the question around this, is when we are seeing that if it's not going to increase and that domestically we do not have the capital or the resources to fund for things, and we need people from overseas to actually come here and buy up these sort of large rental development properties, and there is no other way for us to do that, we must also realize that the revenue that is being made from these will also less likely going to stay in Aotearoa as well. So in many ways, who does this benefit and where is this money going to? And I think it's really important to point out as well as for, and it's, and I think it's incredibly ironic to point out that for myself and for my communities as migrants, we have been repeatedly told that we need to be grateful and fall in line, yet we have a system here who's looking to overseas to help solve our housing issue that we should be, as people from Aotearoa, be grateful for. So when it comes to this, and I'm also in this particular case quite surprised that, the very the very party who are interested in keeping everything within the country to benefit people of Aotearoa seems to be okay with sending some of that money and the revenue that we will be making from this if we keep it within Aotearoa overseas as well. So I think fundamentally, Madam Speaker, there are two major issues that we have with this. Housing crisis is real. We need more houses for our people and for our communities and to create that intergenerational connectivity. That is important. It will be the root cause and it will help solve some of the root cause issues we're seeing in our communities around crime, around mental health, around cost of living. But Madam Speaker, this bill doesn't really address that. And the concern that we have is not only it will not increase the housing stock, it will send the revenue overseas. And at the same time, it will be what this government will do as a pat on the back for a job well done when there are better ways for us to address the crisis.
I call Cameron Brewer.
What another great day for a government that can now proudly claim and own the fact that we are the party for mum and dad landlords, we are the party for homeowners, and now this is just another step to confirm that we are the party for renters. And so, Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise and support this third reading of the Overseas Investment Build to Rent and Similar Rental Developments Amendment Bill. Madam Speaker, let's just take an opportunity to recap on some of the achievements in and around this, because we don't want to overtalk this. We don't want to overtalk this piece of legislation because it's only a small piece of the puzzle. But let's not forget that we've done a lot in and around making housing more affordable, going into the future and putting the downward pressure on rent increases going into the future. We've lifted the bright line test, Madam Speaker, to 10 years. We've brought back deductibility, treating interest as a genuine expense. We've brought back no cause terminations on 90-day contracts. We've put more competition, thanks to Minister Pink. As Minister of Building, we've put more competition into building products. We're reforming our building consent regime, as Minister Pink is working on with the councils. We're making it easier. We're making it easy for granny flats, and of course, building granny flats, and of course, there's the reforms that we will see unleashed this year on the 1991 Resource Management Act. So, Madam Speaker, thank you on this Thursday for giving me that latitude, which is always expected on a third reading from at least one member of the government. And that falls to me. And I won't mention that rents increased $170 per week under the last government, nor will I mention that the social housing waiting list increased by over 20,000. But I want to finish up specifically talking about the bill, because I want to leave a gem with our viewers on Truth Radio and TV, our listeners on Truth Radio and viewers on TV today. That this is perfect for the likes of Auckland, for a city that's gone through the unitary plan of 2016. It caters very well for these medium to large scale build to rents. Whether they can be done and whether they will be done, there's a lot of excitement for the, filling in the terrace housing and apartment zone, mixed housing urban zone. These build to rents, medium-sized residential complexes are perfect in our town centres, our metro centres, in our transport hubs, and on our arterial roads. And if you want to know the excitement that's brewing, go to this. You like that? You like that? If you want to know this, just to finish up, Madam Speaker, because David McLeod gave me 10 minutes, but apparently it's shorter. Buildtorent.co.nz. I'll give it to you again. www.buildtorentnz.co.nz. The Property Council has led this, and you will see on that buildtorentnz.co.nz all what's under construction, with 1,800 completed units, 736 under construction, and nearly 3,000 in the pipeline as of the end of December. Build to Rent is ready to go. It's already started, and this will be huge news to a lot of people around New Zealand today. I commend the bill.
The Honourable Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as my colleague, the Honourable Kieran McAnulty, indicated, that Labor is continuing to support this bill, because I agree with the last sentence of the last speaker that build to rent is underway. And it is underway because when we were in government, we put in place the regime that allowed it to happen. We created the asset class. We made clear that build to rent was part of solving our housing crisis, and I agree with speakers in this House that have been careful to say that this is not some kind of magical solution to the housing crisis in New Zealand, but when we were in government nonetheless, we saw it as an important piece of the puzzle of solving a housing crisis, and why we put in place the legislation to create the asset class of build to rent. And Madam Speaker, I think it is worth remembering that one of the things when creating that asset class is we were creating a new way of renting in New Zealand. This wasn't just about building large apartment blocks and saying that there needed to be X number of owners. It actually was looking at it from the perspective of renters and saying, if we're going to create a new class for landlords, what does that mean for the people who are renting those? So, Madam Speaker, under this asset class, that those people renting those apartments have the right for leases up to 10 years. And this is hugely important. One of the things that we heard very loudly when we were doing the policy work around this is that renting is changing in New Zealand. For some people, they choose to rent their whole lives, and they want to make sure that they can create a home in the place that they are leasing or renting, not live on year-to-year tenancies, not allow their children to continue at the same school, to put down roots in a community. Madam Speaker, one of the things that we in government also put work into was putting in place funding to ensure that this actually could be extended out to community organisations that could provide another part of our housing puzzle in solving a housing crisis, that we could get affordable rentals, not public housing, but something that sat between the market and public housing in the form of community rentals owned and rented at cheaper rates. Unfortunately, this government has removed that piece of the puzzle by scrapping the fund that would have allowed our community providers to do that, and that is a great shame. And I do ask the government to reconsider that, because we will not solve a housing crisis until we resurrect that piece of housing that sits between the market and public housing, and we had in New Zealand for decades and decades, since the 1930s, until the previous national government created community housing providers, access to the IRRS, and we saw the dissolving of what had been a mainstay of housing in New Zealand. So in supporting this bill, I do put that plea out to the government to rethink what I think has been a huge error. And one of the reasons we are seeing upticks in homelessness, why we are seeing more people that are not even getting onto the public housing waiting list but cannot find housing, that we have to make sure that we are looking to solve the housing crisis for the most vulnerable in our communities as well. And if we just leave it to market mechanisms like this, it will not do it on its own. And Madam Speaker, this bill is very specific and very narrow, and that what it does is it responds to concerns from the sector to do a belts and braces approach around laying bare in terms of the Overseas Investment Act around what the test is. There was a long stream of advice that came through from Treasury and from the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development that actually what needed to be done could be done under the settings of the Official Information Act. But Madam Speaker, in government and in opposition, we'd indicated that we were willing to look whether we did need to put further backstops to make it clear that this was an asset class that was open for investment in New Zealand and that we were encouraging. Madam Speaker, there are always tweaks that can be made to a regime. This is a new regime that was only put in place, I think, in 2022, that we passed the legislation to allow the creation of this asset class. We will need to monitor it over the coming years to ensure that it is fit for purpose. We have international examples to look to that many other countries do have build-to-rent schemes, but New Zealand has to make sure that we're continuing watching it to make sure that it is fit for purpose here in Aotearoa. And Madam Speaker, Labor is pleased to support this legislation, but we do urge the government to not cut off what are some incredibly important parts of making this work for all of our community, and that means reversing the cuts that they have made to housing, and in particular in the area of affordable rental housing to community providers.
Ryan Hamilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's great to continue the conversation in this regard. As has been said by, I think, both sides of the House, we appreciate this isn't a silver bullet, but it's certainly part of that puzzle. And as our Minister said, it's creating a streamlined pathway. One of the members opposite was a bit grumpy that we're not extending it to the regions, but I think the realistic nature of this bill is that it's probably not going to appeal to those regions, so I think it's probably a fairly moot point. Madam Speaker, this is largely about supply, and I'd like to quote from the Post from just this Saturday. For example, I have a rental property on the same street as one owned by a friend, and they are similar properties. My property was rented in 2 days, although I did reduce the rent by $70, but my friend reduced his rent by $150 and he still hasn't rented it, end quote. And I think, Madam Speaker, that's an indicative example of the work that we're doing as a government across the ecosystem of housing, and it is and has putting evidence and downward pressure on rents. It's all about supply, Madam Speaker, and this bill is another good example of supply. And the Chair of the Finance Committee, Mr Brewer, has already alluded to many of the layers, the things that we have done over the last few months in government, and of course great news only yesterday, Madam Speaker, to have the OCR drop by 50 basis points. And of course the flow-on effect is just another example of the compound effect that we're doing towards housing. And of course the Minister beside me doing some excellent work around consenting, and again I'll use that term, a streamlined pathway, removing the friction in consenting to get houses built faster and quicker. So instead of taking 3 months or 6 months to get consent, hopefully 6 weeks, and we can build and be more productive. The comment was made that we removed some funding from a housing portfolio, but we're also enabling CHPs to build housing and create remember, Kāinga Ora, how gold... No, if you'd let me finish, you might learn something, the Honourable Megan Watkins. So, Madam Speaker, through the Kāinga Ora wasteful spending situation, we've pulled some of that money back, and we're creating competition with community housing providers to build more housing. So we're actually going to get a more diverse typology of housing, including affordable rentals for you, Megan. So that's fantastic news. So, Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce yet another thing that this government is doing to enable housing supply and get Kiwis housed. Private rental, market rental, affordable, the whole lot. We're into it.
The Honourable Dr. Deborah Russell. Goodness, that was quite something, seeing a newish member of the House explain what's going on in the housing market to the former Minister of Housing. That was just interesting. So I'm just going to explain something else back to that member, and that's to do with rents and what drives rents. And it was something that he might have missed in the monetary policy statement around what was happening with rents, is that existing rents are staying high. New rents are going down. So we know that a large part of what drives rents is demand. Now, if it was the case that rents dropped in response to interest drops, those existing rents should have dropped too, but they have not. So it's a simple little fact, but rents are typically driven by demand in the rental market. So, there's something going on there linked to the number of New Zealanders that have had to leave this country in order to find work. We know that net migration has slowed. That's probably what's been driving the rental market more than anything else. Having said all that, I do want to address this particular bill, the detail of it, rather than the points that have been made in argument. That is, that Labor does support this bill, perhaps with one or two reservations, but this is work that we started, and we do want to see more build-to-rent investment in New Zealand. I think it's important to note for some people who are a bit dubious about it, that all it does is create a streamlined process through the Overseas Investment Act. Right, so all the other requirements of that office still apply. So there are still protections in there for New Zealand in terms of the sale of land. What it does is it creates a capacity where an investor is going to invest in build-to-rent housing, then that can go through the Overseas Investment Office in a slightly more streamlined fashion. And the point of build-to-rent, as my colleague, the former Minister of Housing, Megan Woods, pointed out, was it creates that security for renters, that renters know that they can have the tenure of a property for 10 years, perhaps longer, depending. What it means is that a renter in that build-to-rent space can put down roots in a community. And of course, we know in many countries overseas, people do rent for their entire lives in the same building, in security. It's a perfectly viable method of providing housing and providing long-term secure housing. There is something I think we want to be a little bit cautious about here, though, and that in New Zealand, we have typically accumulated security through home ownership. That is what has built security for a family, for a couple, for an individual, for the next generations of a family. Now, I support build to rent because it does give tenants security of tenure, and perhaps tenants who might not be able to afford to buy a house. But I don't want to see people being priced out of the housing market altogether. I think it's quite important that we do a couple of things. One is that we do work hard to ensure that we have that security of housing tenure available in an ownership model as well as a build-to-rent model. But there's also an alternative. We know that New Zealanders are very fond of their investments in homes and housing. People enjoy investing in it, but there are other routes for building up security, for building up the financial resources of a family. I think one of the things we need to consider is how we enhance KiwiSaver, how we ensure that every person in this country has access to KiwiSaver savings, how that gives them a different form of security. So it's not the security of an owned home, but it is the security of resources built up in your own name through another savings mechanism. And but of course, if we value KiwiSaver, we've also valued the security of the own home, and that's why the build to rent is quite good. I see these things as going together, and I'm just going to point out that we owe a lot to that gifted Minister of Finance, Dr. Michael Cullen, who set up KiwiSaver and got it going. It has proved to be a real boon to New Zealand. I think this move to encourage build-to-rent investment, started under the Labour government, enhanced by this current government, is a good thing to do. And for that reason, Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
I call Nancy Liu.
Madam Speaker, New Zealand needs more high-quality, long-term, stable homes. So build-to-rent is one of the ways that we will deliver them. And this is why I'm standing here to support the Overseas Investment Build-to-Rent Amendment Bill. Now, our government is making it easier for investors to find these projects in New Zealand so we can build more homes, create more jobs, and provide long-term stable homes. And so why do provide more jobs matter for New Zealand? Because they're more than just numbers on spreadsheets. It means more apprentices will get into the projects with construction, more work for tradies, more engineers, more architects, more suppliers, more plumbers, more drainers, more excavator operators, more forklift drivers, more diggers, more landscapers, and the list goes on. It means also for the local businesses, as the developments take shape, more cafes, more coffee, more sandwiches, more hardware stores, more service providers. They will be seeing the real benefits when they see the projects in their community. It also means that Kiwi families in New Zealand will now have more income, have more money for more choices at the supermarket checkouts, more after-school activities for their children. So this is why the build-to-rent is part of our wider plan as the national government to go for growth, because we're saying yes to solutions, yes to actions, yes to more income, yes to a stronger economy for all Kiwis in the country. So therefore, I commend this bill to the House.
The Honourable Barbara Edmonds.
I do just want to indulge the House really shortly for a moment to pay tribute to Jennifer Ann Ning. This morning, the Assistant Speaker and myself and the Sergeant-at-Arms went to her funeral to pay our respects on behalf of Parliament. We heard about Jenny, the friend, Grandma, as the Chamber Office staff members would delightfully call her. And Jenny, the rock dancer, the art appreciator, the jewellery appreciator, Jenny, just an amazing friend. So I do want to acknowledge that Jenny was a wonderful constituent of the electorate of Mana. I loved being able to see her at community meetings at the rest home village where her and Bobby lived. So we give our love and thoughts to Bobby, the young family, and to our Chamber Office staff as well. So, Madam Speaker, I do rise to take a call on behalf of the Labour Party on the Overseas Investment Bill to Rent and Similar Rental Developments Amendment Bill. Many aspects of this bill have been traversed within the various readings and both in the Committee of the Whole House stage. And again, as part of the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee process, we did hear 27 submissions, we received 27 submissions on this, including from a local iwi, which I acknowledged in the second reading of the House, who provided us with a bit more scope for the committee to think about, but parts which not within the scope of this bill. I do want to support a number of the comments made by both Megan Woods and Dr. Megan Woods and Dr. Deborah Russell in relation to this, and to acknowledge Dr. Megan Woods for her work that she did around the build to rent regime, basically bringing it up because we knew that it was an area within the housing policy that was missing at the time when Labor was in government. One of the interesting things is when you're going around meeting a number of businesses and investors, is you actually hear about what are the good things that the previous government had done. And actually one of the large Kiwi investors said that the build to rent work that they had done with, at the time, Minister Woods was actually a standout for them. So I just want to acknowledge Dr. Megan Woods for her work that she's done, and also just acknowledge the Minister for carrying that work through. As members by the Labor Party have set out, this is a very narrow set of circumstances in the Overseas Investment Act. It does streamline the test in order to make things slightly quicker for those that have the volume of build-to-rent units. And it does also include, it has not removed some of those protections from the Overseas Investment Act, which is why this side of the House is supporting it, is because one, it makes it slightly easier because of the type of test it is with the volume and the 20 units that's put in, but also because some of the other protections which are still within the Act apply. I also do want to acknowledge the point made by Honourable Kieran McAnulty in relation to the regional tests. We did hope that as a party that we would be able to convince other members of the House to consider proportionality, particularly in the regions where 20 units actually could be quite difficult to build. It's unfortunate that we were unable to convince members on the other in the government side to change that through the Committee of the Whole, but nevertheless, even despite that, we will still support this bill, and I commend this bill to the House.
I call Dan Bidwell.
The coalition government is going for growth in incomes, jobs and housing. And a big part of this is by unlocking the potential of foreign direct investment. And the way we do this is by removing barriers, Madam Speaker. And so that is what this bill seeks to do by incentivising foreign investment in build to rent. And I think, Madam Speaker, all that has been said in this House is relevant. I don't have much more to contribute other than to say I agree with the statements made from many sides of this part of the House. It is part of the solution. It is good news for Auckland. It's good news for renters. It's good news for wider New Zealand. I commend this bill to the House.
Oh, good speech, good news.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote is called for, Madam Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
Members, the ayes are 102, the noes are 15. The question is agreed to.
Overseas Investment, Build to Rent and Similar Rental Developments Amendment Bill, third reading.
I call on Government Orders of the Day, numbers 2 and 3.
District Court Judges Amendment Bill, committee stage. Arms, Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill, committee stage.
I declare the House in committee for consideration of those bills.
Hello, Madam Chair. Hello, how are you? Maureen will be back in a minute.
Members, the House is in committee on the District Court Judges Amendment Bill and the Arms, Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill. We come first to the District Court Judges Amendment Bill. Members, we come now to Clause 1. Yeah, in a moment. I've got a point of order from Tom Rutherford.
Basically, for provisions to be taken as one question.
Leave is sought for this purpose. Is there objection? Yes. There is objection. So first of all, we come, members, to Clause 1. The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I am pleased to speak on the District Court Judges Amendment Bill. The bill amends the District Court Act 2016 to increase the statutory maximum number of District Court judges by 1, from 182 to 183 full-time equivalent judges. This increase will help alleviate any pressure on the courts arising from the implementation of the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill, which is currently being considered by this House. Funding for the additional District Court judge has been secured from Budget 2024. On behalf of the Minister of Justice, I am committed to improving timeliness and reducing delays in our courts. It is critical that victims, their families and everyone coming through the courts can access fair and timely justice so they can move on with their lives faster. While this bill is specifically targeted to supporting sentencing reforms, the government also has a much wider timeliness program underway. The government and the judiciary are working to roll out several initiatives across the courts, such as improvements to the duty lawyer system, bail scheduling and larger reforms like Te Aurika. These are designed to create a more efficient system, with progress and impacts on the courts being closely monitored. Once we have a better idea of how the courts are performing under these new initiatives, further resourcing requirements can be considered if needed. Madam Chair, the statutory cap on District Court judges includes youth court judges and family court judges, as the youth court and the family court are both divisions of the District Court. The cap was last amended in 2019. Since then, additional judges have been appointed, bringing the total number of full-time equivalent judges to, at or near the statutory maximum. We currently have 181.2 full-time equivalent judges appointed, bringing us very close to the current statutory cap of 182. The cap on the number of judges is set out in legislation, so Parliament can have oversight of public spending on judges while preserving judicial independence. While we are asking the courts to do more in imposing tougher sentences for criminals and implementing stronger law and order policies, the government is also ensuring they have the resources needed to do so. In conclusion, Madam Chair, notwithstanding this is a small bill, I consider this an important part of delivering on the government's law and order commitments and supporting the courts to deliver timely justice.
I call Lawrence Unan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have we're on Clause 1, but I just have a quick question for the Minister, just to pick up on what the Minister was mentioning before. And thank you, Minister, for giving such a comprehensive background and context on this bill and some of the wider projects. But I think one of the things with the District Court Judges Amendment Bill, as indicated in the title, is that when the bill was being debated, it was a part of the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill as well. But now hearing from the Minister in terms of some of the broader work that is being done in terms of the judiciary and around capacity and etc., I want to check with the Minister then is why then did this bill get introduced at this particular moment when other works are already being done, especially since this bill has been split out from the Sentencing Amendment, Reform Amendment Bill, so that it functions, it has to go through all of these processes, including the debate and all of the speeches and etc. Why do we need to then go through all of that when the ministers indicating was signaling that there's other works being done. Surely it might be a good idea to see how some of that is being carried out first, and then having a better sense of whether what has been indicated in this bill is actually the best option or the best number of increase. And I'm sure that the minister has also saw a number of submissions that other people have made comments in terms of the actual number, which I'm sure we'll debate on to in clause 4. But I think in the context of clause 1 and what the minister said, I just want to check, based on what you said, why then this bill now? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I call the Honourable Nicole McKee. I thank the Green member for his question, and I understand why it's being asked. If I can just relate back to the last increase that occurred in 2019, where we actually increased the number of judges from 165 through to 182. And that was for a number of reasons at the time, and we quickly went up to, I believe it's about 172 judges within that appointment. The officials have gone away, looked at what the reforms that this government are putting through will require in terms of how many judges will be needed. Because we're sitting on that 181.2, we just want to be able to relieve some of that pressure should there be an increase required. So this will actually lift the cap to 182.5. 183.5. It's currently sitting on 182 or 181.5. So many numbers. So in actual fact, we do think that just one additional judge will be required should we actually need it. At this stage, having moved in 2019 from 165 judges to 182, we've already put a significant increase of judges into the district court system. So this really is a bit of a backfill just in case it's needed. I call Lawrence Zunan.
Sorry. Just a very brief question, because I want to ask the Minister, and also signaling to Madam Chair, you as well, that I have more questions when we get to section 4 of this bill in terms of the number itself. But I want to pick up on what the Minister, what you mentioned before. Can I just check in your expert opinion, also in terms of the information you have from the officials, what you're saying is that the addition of one at this stage is anticipatory in case the capacity increases, but the actual capacity that we have now in terms of the court system is actually sufficient based on the 2019 increase. Would that be a correct assumption?
Can I just remind the member we're on clause 1, which is around the title? Okay. Can I call the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb?
Madam Chair, Labor supports this bill, but certainly doesn't support the legislation which the Minister says has given rise to it. And so I don't intend to have a substantive debate about the provisions of the bill, but there are two kind of general policy matters that I would invite the Minister to comment on. She's already noted that there was a rise in the number of available district court judges from 165 to 182 some years ago. And it's against that background, against that increase, we've seen a very significant increase in judges' workloads.
Dr. Webb, can I just remind you we're on clause 1?
Yes, well, I understand that clause 1, the title clause, is the appropriate place to have a wider policy discussion about introductory discussion about policy. And if I may say, Madam Chair, I don't intend to go through in detail further in the debate. So I thought I'd get these policy questions out of the way early on. And then we, if Zunan wants to go through in detail, he's welcome to, but I won't be. So if I'm asking your indulgence, I'll do that.
As long as it relates to clause 1.
It's the District Court Judges Amendment Bill, and the question is around the number of judges. My first question is really about the number of judges required, because we've got not only the Sentencing Act that this was going to be associated with, but also the Young Serious Offenders legislation and the Gang Patch and 3 Strikes law. And my first question is whether the number is even going to be enough. And my second question is, because the Minister in her introductory comments mentioned her work programme in terms of the district court judges putting some procedures in place and some work on bail and duty solicitors. And my second question is, what, in terms of the numbers of cases backlogged and the time taken, what progress has been made with those? And if there's no progress, that's a concern, but if there is progress, why do we need this?
Madam Chair, I call the Honourable Nicole McKee. I thank the member for his question, but I don't see anywhere in the title where it talks about the number of judges. The District Court Judges Amendment Bill is about initiating one more judge from 182 to 183. I call Tom Rutherford.
Debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those of that opinion, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we now come to Clause 2. The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Lawrence Zunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to check, in terms of the commencement date, I would like to get some clarifications from the Minister. Yes, it's perfectly understandable and it's quite a common practice. We see that, the Act comes into force after royal assent. But something that we did see in terms of, as part of the Select Committee process and also the report, is around the fact that the appointment of the appointment of the judge itself could happen at any time. So while the commencement date, Madam Chair, if I could, while the commencement date is after royal assent, I want to check with the Minister if the Minister has any sort of advice or any thoughts around when this appointment will likely to take place.
Madam Chair. Honourable Nicole McKee. That's not for me to decide about when an appointment may take place. What this bill does is allow for the implementation of an extra judge when it's needed. It's expedient for us to do so as soon as this bill has received royal assent, should it be voted that far through, and it looks like it will be because it seems to have support across the House. And all we are merely doing is allowing the judiciary and other officials to start the appointment process when it may be determined to be needed. The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 3 stand part. The question is that Clause 3 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members, we are up to Clause 4, Section 12, amended maximum number of judges. The question is that Clause 4 stand part. I call Lawrence Zunan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a number of questions around Clause 4 regarding the increase, the amendment numbers from 182 to 183, or when we're looking at potentially part-time Fs from 181.5 to 182.5. I guess my first question is, when we're looking at Section 12 of the District Court Judge, we can't read Section 12 independently. We must read it in conjunction, and I think particularly in conjunction with Section 11 of the District Court Act 2016. And I think, although the Minister, you mentioned before that this is sort of anticipatory in terms of, then the court system is able to start identifying and doing and working all of those. I want to check if the Minister has considered, first and foremost, whether how that process is going to take place, and particularly in terms of which areas are most likely we're looking at where that judge is going to be appointed. Again, I come back to the purpose of this bill in conjunction with the Sentencing Reform Amendment Bill, which states that it's in anticipation of increase in potentially load of the number of people who are going to be attributed to that. But then what I'm not sensing or having any clarity on is how then we're going to take that conjunction bill that is going to be looked at later and then find a solution to know where that extra 1Fs or potentially multiple 0.2 or 0.5 dotted is going to actually be appointed throughout the country. Because if we see a sudden increase in, let's say, Tamaki Makaurau, we're not going to be able to know that if we appoint someone, appoint a 0.5 judge in Aotearoa. So I just want to get a sense of how you're planning on that, on the data that you're going to be using to know where to appoint that extra one judge.
Madam Chair, Honourable Nicole McKee. Madam Chair, the purpose of this bill is to allow for the appointment of an extra judge and raising the cap. The detail that the member is looking for is not actually relevant to the bill that's here, and it's not the minister in charge of the bill that makes the appointments. Appointments are made with the help of the judiciary, who will help inform officials as to where that extra additional help may be needed. So for the purposes of this bill, it's allowing them the opportunity to be able to make those additional appointments. I call the Honourable Dr Duncan Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will have another go because I didn't get a very satisfactory answer last time. And if it's, I'll reframe it to be a question about the number of judges rather than a general policy question. There were two parts to my question, but I'll ask them separately. In terms of having one judge, there has been an ongoing problem of a backlog of work in significant delays in a number of courts, but especially in the district court. The Minister alluded to a number of initiatives, and in determining that one judge is enough, it seems to presuppose that those initiatives are being effective. So could she assure the House, preferably by reference to some substantive evidence, that the initiatives that she referred to, and I recall bail, district court judges initiatives and duty solicitor initiatives, are having tangible results on a reduction in backlogs? Madam Chair.
I'll call Honourable Dr Duncan Webb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I took my seat because I thought the Minister would respond directly, but if she needs to take some advice on that, that's fine as well. My other question in terms of whether the number of one is the right number relates to the advice she received, and she alluded to receiving advice about the Sentencing Act. But the Sentencing Act is only one part of the program that the government has. And so I would like to hear from her whether she is confident that in respect of the Sentencing Act, just one judge is enough, because looking at the complexity of that Act, it's a lot of work, and there's certainly going to be a lot more sentencing done and a lot more imprisonment. But also in terms of the other reforms in the justice sector that will create more work for district court judges, including 3 strikes, gang patches and young serious offenders, whether she's taken into account that legislation and the additional judicial workload flowing from those pieces of legislation as well.
Madam Chair. Honourable Nicole McKee. Thank you to the member for his questions. The advice that we have received is that one judge at this stage should be enough. And part of the reason why we are not looking to do a massive increase like we did previously with 165 to 182 is because of the financial implications that are there that could be based on actually allowing this, because it's ongoing, right? So we want to ensure that we have what is required, and what we have been told is required is one judge. When it comes to the other initiatives of this government to restore law and order back into our communities and make criminals accountable for their crimes, then we have other initiatives that we have in place for court timeliness, and this will help free up some of the judges' times as well. But at the moment, what we're looking at is the implementation of legislation to allow the consideration of increasing what is required in the courts by the judges, and we think that we are being proactive in this. I'm being asked what are the numbers. Well, the other laws haven't actually gone through yet, nor have any sentences gone through yet. So what we are doing is being proactive
and preparing for what is to come, because we will be making criminals accountable for their actions.
Lawrence Sunan.
Madam Chair. Again, coming back to clause 4, and I want to pick up on what the Honourable Dr. Duncan Webb has said, but the thing is, what I want to check as well from the Minister, again, I hear Minister's passionate speech, that is fine, but I want to check with the Minister if she has received advice in terms of the number of judges, specifically if she has taken into, or her officials has taken into consideration on the 2022 report for improving access to civil justice, and particularly when it comes to the fact that, in that report it does specify that despite the fact that there is an increase in the number of district court judges, like the Minister has said, from 160 to 182, we are still seeing a decline of district courts' civil jurisdiction, and they were still catching up to it. So has the Minister, in making the decision on just increasing one, in this case, taking into consideration the recommendations of this particular report, being the first question? And the second question for the Minister is, if there are other things that the Minister said that they are considering, are we hearing from the Minister that she is also not ruling out the possibility that we might be seeing a further piece of legislation down the track that would increase the number of district, maybe not even district court judges, but other form of judges as well? And the last thing I want to ask is that, does she have any idea, because she said that district court judges not only includes the district court, but other courts as well in terms of youth court and family court, how would this extra one person, one judge will be coming from, and whether this one extra judge will be going into youth court, will be going to district court, will be going to family court, whether there's evidence for that. So 3 questions to the Minister. The first one is, has the Improving Access to Civil Justice report been taken into consideration as part of this decision making? Number 2, in terms of the increase of just one, are we seeing future legislation based on what the Minister has said that potentially increase the number of judges further? And number 3 is, does she have any idea or any sort of clarification around which court would this judge likely go to, whether it's just district, youth, or family?
Madam Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
I'm going to say it again. The decision to increase one judge is based on the advice and the research that's been done, the information that's been received from the judiciary as well as the officials as to what we could proactively implement should there be an increase. I did not make mention of any further legislation coming. What I made mention of is other court timeliness aspects that this government is producing to help the judges. And as for the clarification as to where they will go, I'll just repeat again. The legislation that we are preparing for has not gone through the House yet, has not impacted the courts yet, and the whole purpose of allowing an extra district court judge is to be able to implement one should we need it and wherever it is needed.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, Madam Chair.
Lawrence Sunan.
Just very quickly, I totally understand where the Minister is coming from, but by locking us into one additional judges, surely the Minister then has or is anticipating this, because this was the advice that the Minister has given. Therefore, it is not within the realm of this House that we do ask the Minister on where does the Minister think this is going. I understand that we're looking at a level of the judiciary independence and how they're able to do. But surely by knowing that only one potentially is needed, that there are other advice or suggestions or clarification that she has received regarding where it's going.
Madam Chair.
I call the Honourable Nicole McKee.
Maybe I can reword it another way.
In 2019, we increased from 165 to 182 based on the projections that the officials in the judiciary told us that they needed. That was 6 years ago. We are now at a point where they are suggesting there is the possibility that we may need one more. And so we are introducing one more just in case they need that.
Madam Chair.
I'm going to call Carl Bates.
I move the debate on this question now close.
The question is that debate on this question now close. All those of that opinion, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill without amendment. Point of order, Honourable.
On the bill itself, final pause. You just had a vote on whether the debate now closed.
Oh, the question is, Mr. Bitt. Thank you, Dr. Webb. The question is, members, that clause 4 stand part. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will now report this bill without amendment. Thank you. Members, the House is still in committee on the District Court. Sorry. Arms. We now come to the Arms Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill. Members, we start with Part 1, which is the debate on clauses 4 to 10, shooting clubs and shooting ranges, and the schedule. The question is that Part 1 stand part.
Madam Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Madam Chair, I'm pleased to be here for this stage of the Arms, Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill. This bill forms Phase 2 of the Government's 4-phase approach to firearms reform, which will provide for greater protection of public safety by simplifying regulatory requirements to improve compliance. The bill signals a change of approach from the current punitive regulation of shooting clubs and ranges to a more collaborative approach that supports public safety. Shooting clubs and ranges play an important public safety role. They are places where firearm users can learn, practice and compete in a safe environment. Ensuring these facilities are well supported to continue is important, as well as without these spaces, firearms users will not have safe places to perform shooting activities or to sight in their rifles, creating risks that people will engage in these behaviours in areas that could put the public at risk. The bill aims to improve the regulation of clubs and ranges by repealing and replacing Part 6 to make several key legislative amendments. Distinction between the pistol and the non-pistol areas, clubs and members. This bill creates a distinction between the pistol and non-pistol shooting clubs and ranges. This reflects the distinction between how pistols and non-pistols are already regulated in parts of the Arms Act. In recognition of the higher regulatory requirements that are associated with pistols, the regulatory requirements for pistol clubs and ranges remains largely the same. The only change is to streamline the annual reporting requirements for pistol clubs by requiring that annual reports be submitted within 2 months of the end of the financial year. For non-pistol clubs and ranges, the current approval and certification systems are replaced with a new enrolment system. The enrolment system is designed to ensure that the regulator has the information necessary to ensure public safety while reducing costs and the time burden for operators, many of whom are volunteers. I consider this will improve compliance and continue to provide for public safety. The bill supports the operation of a temporary non-pistol ranges by persons who have specialist knowledge by removing the barrier of certification. Instead, the regulator must be notified of the event. The temporary range can only operate for a maximum of 2 events per year, and each event can be no more
or can be for no more than 4 days in duration. The bill seeks to reduce compliance burdens where there is no clear public safety benefit. Under the bill, non-pistol clubs will still have to be incorporated if they sell firearms and ammunition. However, they will not have to be incorporated if they only sell ammunition at the club range or event which is used on the day of the sale and is not taken off club premises. The bill makes changes to compliance requirements. It specifies the timing at which inspections can occur. For pistol clubs and ranges, this is upon application for approval and certification, and then at renewal dates. For non-pistol clubs and ranges, inspections can take place upon application for enrolment and then every 5 years. In both cases, additional inspections can take place if there is a change in circumstance which impacts the safety of the range. This helps clarify requirements for volunteers while ensuring inspections are still able to occur when necessary to ensure public safety. The other change is to specify that the regulator can only remove hard copy documents during an inspection. I consider these changes will ensure that clubs and ranges are not unduly burdened with compliance requirements while providing strong incentives for operators to maintain high safety standards. Lastly, Madam Chair, the bill makes a series of changes to existing references to the Minister of Police and the Commissioner to reflect the shift in the policy responsibility for the Arms Act from the police portfolio to the justice portfolio. Ultimately, the bill addresses the over-regulation of clubs and ranges by reducing requirements which have no clear public safety benefit.
I call the Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. By supporting shooting clubs and ranges to comply with the Act, we can support better public safety outcomes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I call Ginny Anderson.
Very much, Madam Chair.
My apologies, the Honourable
Thank you very much for the opportunity to take a call on the Arms, Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill. I have a number of questions, but the primary one which I'd like to really understand from the Minister is about the proposed enrolment system which is contained within the bill. The bill provides to really return to a system which was here in New Zealand before 2019, and it appears to be largely voluntary to allow safety practices set by the shooting governing body, and that the concern that we have in the Labour Party is that it provides no ability for police to enforce the rules unless breaches are drawn to their attention by a third party. And police themselves and the Police Association have raised this issue during the committee stage, and also police, the organisation, have raised these issues in their briefings both to the Minister and in their briefings to the committee. The proposals contained within this bill will effectively limit police inspections of clubs and ranges to once in every 5 years at the first application for enrolment or certification, and then at a 5-yearly application for renewal. So the reduced ability for police to carry out inspections, we consider, undermines the ability to enforce safety. And while the primary purpose of this bill is to increase public safety, it seems disingenuous that we, through this legislation, are disempowering New Zealand police to be able to enforce safety. This bill also increases the opportunity for unsupervised shooting ranges by people without licences, and it does create multiple loopholes for gang members and extremists, such as the one that happened in Christchurch on March 15th. In that particular instance, we had someone who was able to practice their shooting skills without police oversight. And our concern is that this legislation returns us to a system which would enable that terror attack to occur again in New Zealand. It increases the opportunities also, Madam Chair, for the supply of ammunition. And so that is a real concern for those criminals who unlawfully hold a firearm to be able to potentially access ammunition. We know that ammunition is a form of currency in the criminal underworld, and it creates a very dangerous precedent in the space for where these pop-up ranges can now occur. So you could effectively have a shooting range appear over your back fence if you live rurally. There's absolutely no ability for police to enforce safety measures or even inspect these facilities. And if there are only 2 events per calendar year, there is no oversight. In our view, this is effectively a Wild West approach to firearms regulation in New Zealand. Police are effectively locked out of doing inspections of either pistol ranges or non-pistol ranges for 5 years. And it's for that reason, Madam Speaker, I would like the Minister to consider the amendment that I've proposed. And that amendment is to enable police to conduct those inspections. And so Amendment 2, which removes subsection 2 so that the provision is the same as the existing Arms Act, would provide that police are able to inspect any shooting range, both pistol and non-pistol, with a minimum of 7 days' notice to inspect compliance with police shooting range manual requirements. And that would be for ballistics, for safety, and for general public safety. We believe that the self-regulation of something as dangerous as a firearm is not appropriate for New Zealand. We've learnt in our past that this can cause devastating effects to our community, and we really would like to understand from the Minister why police are being shut out of the ability to have oversight of something that is an incredibly dangerous area, and when police themselves have repeatedly asked for their ability to have oversight in this area. And furthermore, I'll just wind up quickly, that in 2024, Parliament's Petitions Committee questions the ability of operators of shooting clubs and ranges to be able to monitor and screen criminals, and I'd be interested to hear...
I'll just let the member finish this question.
I'll just finish that.
Thank you.
So if the Minister would also like to answer that in 2024, she may be aware that Parliament's Petitions Committee questioned the ability of operators of shooting clubs and ranges to be able to monitor or screen for criminals and extremists who use the facilities. And I want to know if she's read that petition, if she's aware of the advice within that petition, and it also noted that police and security agencies needed oversight of club internal processes, which this bill cuts them out of.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's a lot to unpack in there, especially the pure amount of misinformation that has just been read out on what this bill does and why this bill has amendments. So bear with me while I try to go through everything that the member incorrectly said in her 5-minute contribution. And I expect that it's going to take me a little while to go through this. Should I not have captured everything that the member had said, I invite the member to stand up again so that we can address some of that. I'm going to, first of all, move to the enrolment system that we have introduced. The member has made the allegation that we are going to be returning to what it was before. We are not. Before, we did not have any enrolment system whatsoever, except for the pistol clubs, where police would go along and check on the ranges. What the member has failed to understand in her time sitting in the committee and listening to submitters is the fact that parent organisations from across the country already have their range standing operations, how they're going to create a range and how they're going to operate that range. I'm going to just now speak to the petition that the member spoke to about range volunteers' ability to monitor extremists. That is not a volunteer's job, and the moment we start putting that onto volunteers into New Zealand, then I have to have grave concerns about what the role of New Zealand Police would be, because that's for them. That's for them to make sure that they any person who gets a firearms licence is actually fit and proper to be in possession of it. And for those that may be watching this at home, licensed firearm owners, and there's just under 250,000 of them, are under watch for fit and proper behaviour every single day of their lives. If they come to the attention of New Zealand Police for any reason whatsoever, even if it's for being caught in a car accident, ask New Zealand Police because they will confirm it. They get every night, every 24 hours, they get a list of licensed firearm owners who have come to the attention of New Zealand Police. And that has been in place for quite some time. And that, Duncan Webb, is a fact. What else have we got here? We've talked about, the member inaccurately once again said that police have been locked out of ranges. Police have not been locked out of ranges. And in fact, if the member bothered to even read the legislation, it says, we will ensure that the 5-year ability is there unless there is a change in circumstance. Now, that change in circumstance could mean, for example, a weather event that may have potentially done damage to the backstop on a range. And I think what is really important here is that for some reason, that member thinks that all those volunteers that run the ranges and deliver the service for their communities are not interested in maintaining their range or making sure that they are operational. And that in itself is a discredit to the volunteers in the country who have kept so many people safe by keeping an eye on those that are coming in, teaching them safe firearms handling skills and making sure that they are keeping an eye on them. Because once upon a time, we had a position where those that were, in charge of firearms activities had a relationship with New Zealand Police and were able to go knock on their door and tell them when they had concerns about an individual's behaviour. That is still there, but that is something that we need to encourage more of because the trust and confidence has unfortunately been lost. And this is a way of being able to repair it. When we're talking about the supply of ammunition, and in fact the member, for some reason, has mentioned that non-licensed people could open up a pop-up range and practice shooting skills. I have no idea what this has to do with the Arms Act because non-licensed people don't come under the Arms Act, they come under the Crimes Act, right? And there is, if they're going to go ahead and do that, open up a range, then they are committing an illegal activity in itself under the Crimes Act. And also, Madam Chair.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, the fact that there are these pop-up ranges, there is legislation, I know the member's not really interested, there is legislation around the pop-up ranges. I'm losing my train of thought, there was so much there. There is legislation around the pop-up ranges which requires that not just anybody can create a temporary range. It's not a pop-up range, it's a temporary range. In fact, only those that can create a temporary range are those that are either a member of a club or organisation that is already considered to be a part of the fraternity. So it's not Joe Bloggs, and anyone else that goes about doing that will effectively be committing an offence. The ammunition side of it, this is really important. And I think, again, it speaks to the member not having any understanding about what actually happens on a range. The member is making accusations of innocent members of the public who are volunteers that they will potentially be giving live ammunition to people to take away from the range and not record it. That's not how it operates. And if the member knew the law, she would also know that a firearms licence is required in order to buy and sell ammunition. And when they are not in possession of a firearms licence, then they must be under the immediate supervision of someone who does have a firearms licence. And that person, if the member had ever even attempted to go to a club and see how it operates, would know that what is dispersed is the number of rounds required to finish or compete or complete an actual event. Any spare rounds are taken back to the club. It's almost like the army, you know, where the army must account for all of their rounds. That's exactly what the club has done too. So I invite the member to actually read the legislation and stop misleading and scaring the public, because this is actually going to create a really good regime that Labor failed in.
Scott Willis.
I rise to take a call because I have heard a number of statements from the Minister which are inflammatory and inaccurate, and there is much I want to address in this bill. When I look at the regulatory impact statement, I see that there's a statement here that continuation of the status quo may contribute to the closure of shooting clubs and ranges where the volunteers who run them are unwilling or unable to comply with the regulatory requirements. We know that the current regime has only been in existence for a year, and further on in the regulatory impact statement, it says there is little evidence of any positive or negative impacts of the requirements, of the current requirements. But we're told in the regulatory impact statement that in fact there has been very little engagement. There's been incredible time constraint on the development of this bill because of the Minister's desire and knowledge of the firearms sector. But it's been compacted. And I say this as a firearms owner. I was astonished to hear. I've had my firearms licence since I was 16. I'm astonished to hear that I'm now observed by the police day and night for my behaviour because I have a firearms licence, and I can tell the Minister that is not true. It is certainly not true, and quite to the point that there is very strict control of what happens on shooting ranges. We would have to put our faith in the good nature of the volunteers on every shooting range. And while I do go to shooting ranges and I do know really good people, I couldn't confirm that every single volunteer at every single shooting range will operate with a protection and safety in mind, and will not behave in a way or make something possible for the criminals in our community, the criminal fraternity who may well want to access ranges and we can't identify them. And the Minister is correct that the police should be notifying or keeping tabs on those who are in the criminal underworld. But of course, our volunteers should be able to, who run the ranges, should be able to notify the police and should be keeping tabs on that as well. There are many, many points I want to make, and in particular I've heard how the current regime is so punitive, how it's been so burdensome on people, and yet there is no evidence for that. What we have here is a solution in search of a problem. We've got now a situation where we don't know when the police are going to. Well, the police have to give notice for when they will be able to check on a range. They have to give, and they can only do so within a certain period. If we think about that, should our traffic officers as well give us notice when they are going to be on the roads? Should they let us know, give us 5 years warning when they're going to check whether we're speeding or have a license or a warrant of fitness or our car is registered? Should the traffic police also give us notice, 7 days notice, that they're going to turn up to check the speed cameras? This is what this amounts to. It is absolutely ridiculous that we have taken away the ability of police to investigate, just to check, just to make sure things are okay. We have removed that from this bill. This bill claims to want more safety. It claims to be working for public safety, and it is doing the exact opposite. So I'm very much in support of Ginny Anderson's amendment, and I would ask the Minister to consider and explain whether she will accept it. The amendment in clause section 38XJ to delete subsection 2. I think that is an absolute necessity, and it should be done, and I'd like the Minister to respond to whether she will at least do that. Thank you.
Just before I call the Minister, it's come to my attention that one of the members heard someone calling out lies during one of the Minister's sections, and I'm just wondering, is there a member in the House that actually said that who would like to withdraw and apologise?
Withdraw and apologise.
Thank you, and I hope that won't be repeated this afternoon or any time soon. Thank you. Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you.
Point of order, Honourable Kira McAnulty.
Thank you very much. I raise an issue that I've been reflecting on for a wee while now, and that interaction made me think perhaps now's a good time to raise it. An accusation of misinformation or disinformation is akin to accusing of someone of lying, and we haven't actually had any clear ruling on that, but it is an interjection that we hear relatively regularly in this House. You cannot call a member a liar, we know that, and I'm conscious that you're in the chair, but as presiding officers, could that be something that you could reflect on and maybe come back to us?
Absolutely. I'll commit to do that. Thank you. Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just if I may speak to that point of order, if there are...
You can speak to the point of order if you wish to. I've committed to go back and see what the ruling is around it, but if you feel like there's something that you'd like to say about what you've said, then feel free. It's your time.
Yes, I just would ask in the Chair's reflection on that word misinformation, if we cannot use a word that accurately describes what's just been said in the House, could the Chair then suggest what would be appropriate?
So we'll review the Hansard and what's been said today, and we'll come back. I commit to coming back with a decision on that one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to speak to the Green member's points. The Green member referred to the regulatory impact statement, which said that, in his view, that there's no evidence for change of the status quo. I'm going to ask the member to reflect on the statements that were made when the legislation came in that said there was no evidence that there was a problem that needed to be fixed. We are not going back to what it was. We have taken some of the safety aspects of the introduction of Part 6 and maintained them. What we are looking to do here is stop some of the duplicative work and the burden that is on those volunteers to maintain it. We have carefully gone through what it is that we are repealing or changing to ensure that it does not have a significant impact on public safety. And we are confident that there are no changes there that do that. In relation to who can open a range, what we never had, as I mentioned before, was an enrolment system. We now have that. And there are consequences if a gang member goes and starts up a range and does not enrol with New Zealand Police or the administrator, that they have opened that range. It's a consequence. Before this legislation, we did not have that. So I am at a loss as to why the left side of this House are constantly saying that we're rolling back, when in actual fact, we are making things stronger. Also, as part of that enrolment system, anyone that enrolls a range must, as I'd mentioned earlier, fit the criteria that is required in order to be able to open up what is referred to as a temporary range. And anyone that wants to start a whole new range must also comply by having range standing orders implemented and approved at that time as well. Actually, not approved, but they must show that they've got range standing orders. Now, if there is an issue and a safety issue, that does not stop the administrator or the regulator from allowing the administrator to go and have a look. And quite frankly, a lot of the clubs, well, most of the clubs and ranges that I've seen around have put their hands up and want to comply, want to be a part of the solution, and what we are doing is ensuring that they can, because they're finding difficulties in so many places. We have not removed the ability for rangers to be checked on, so I don't understand where you're coming from with that. In relation to the tabled amendment 12.30.01, this is in relation to, oh sorry, it's the wrong one, XJ, sorry, my apologies. It's amendment 12.30.02, and it's about removing section 38XJ, deleting subsection 2. And I'm again probably quite shocked that the member actually wants to remove the ability for police to be able to go and check on a range in every 5 years, because that's what it says. XJ2 is talking about when a commissioner is considering an application for certification or renewal of its certification in respect of a non-pistol range. The commissioner is considering an application for enrolment, and then at intervals of not less than 5 years. By removing that subsection, we're actually removing the ability for the range to be checked. And I'm at a loss at why, when the left are saying that they're looking at public safety, they would want to remove that provision. So I will not be in favour of voting for that amendment, because I think that that would create a public safety risk.
Honourable Dr Megan Woods.
Chair, thank you for the call. And Madam Chair, this is the first time I've had a chance to speak on this bill in this House, but certainly not the first time I've engaged with this legislation. Elnor Mosque is in my electorate. I had friends that died on March 15. I have friends to this day who are walking around with lead in their bodies and are still undergoing surgeries to have that lead removed. So, Mr Speaker, when I hear a minister sitting in the chair talking about the burden, I want her to understand a very clear burden, and that is walking around with a body full of lead, or for children walking around without their parents, for wives walking around without their husbands, and for a community that is grieving. So my first question to the Minister is, Minister, what engagement will you commit to doing with the Christchurch Muslim community in terms of these changes? We know, and it's a matter of public record, that that community feels they have not had the ability to talk to you as the Minister in charge of this legislation, that you have not engaged, you have not met, and you have not entered into dialogue with the people who are literally walking around with the burden of the consequence of us not having gun law right in this country. So what commitments will you make to that? Madam Speaker, one of the pieces that I want to talk to is an amendment that is in the name of my colleague, the Honourable Ginny Anderson, and that is to Clause 5, new section 38X1IA, and Clause 2 after 38X1 insert that non-pistol shooting ranges to comply with the Police Shooting Range Manual. Non-pistol shooting ranges must comply with requirements and guidance set out in the Police Shooting Range Manual. And Madam Speaker, I think that this is a really important amendment that my colleague has put forward, and I'd like to hear the Minister's views on it and whether she'll comply with it. Because what my colleague Ginny Anderson is doing is inserting the police right back into the equation around our gun laws, as the changes that we made post-March 15 for a reason did. If the Minister had spent time with the Christchurch Muslim community and had entered into a dialogue with them, for more than 15 minutes. What she would know is that it is the police who have that trusted relationship with the Muslim community. It is the police that those communities look to for their assurance of their safety. It is the police who they feel are keeping them safe. And Madam Speaker, the ability of the police to go and for the communities to understand that the police have a role with the clubs is vitally important for part of the work that needs to happen in terms of earning back the trust of a community. Madam Speaker, we don't have to look much further than the pages of the Royal Commission into March 15, when we hear that a few members of the Bruce Rifle Club said 3 aspects of the individual, that being the terrorists' behaviour, was slightly out of the ordinary and with hindsight might be significant. The individual usually shot while standing up. He went through a large amount of ammunition and his primary interests appeared to be firing at extremely fast rates and changing magazines quickly. The individual displayed considerable interest in the military background of one of the members, an interest that made that member uncomfortable. And sometimes the individual made remarks that were interpreted as indications that he had access to a large capacity magazine. According to 2 members, the individual was of the view that it was lawful for him to own a large capacity magazine. It's important that I read those into the Hansard, Madam Chair, because it speaks directly.
Can I just ask the member, is that currently publicly available information?
Yes.
Because some of this is before the coroner. So that
No,
if it's publicly
available,
that's fine.
It's from the Royal Commission's report.
Great, excellent.
That it was released publicly, and one I thought the Minister would be familiar with, given it is so pertinent to any changes that we would be making about gun law. So I do encourage the Minister, if she has not read the report of the Royal Commission, they are chilling words, but nonetheless they are important words and the very basis for why we have to make sure that our, Madam Chair, the very basis for why I'll just conclude, we have to make sure that our gun laws in this country are safe. It speaks directly to why I'm asking the Minister to support my colleague's amendment that puts the police right back at the centre of what needs to happen to ensure the safeties of our communities, that the burden of that safety, keeping our communities safe, which is something that our gun laws need to do, is carried as well. And I'd also ask the Minister a very simple question. How many gun clubs have shut down since the change in law?
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Madam Chair, I understand the emotion that is around what occurred on March 15. And I think what is really important to put into the Hansard right now is that those under 250,000 licensed firearm owners were not that one individual. And those 250,000 licensed owners who have been checked by New Zealand Police, as I've mentioned, fit and proper status every single day, is something that actually should be celebrated, because these people have been seen to be fit and proper. When we talk about March 15, we also need to actually weigh up the legislative changes that were made then and the impact that it's had, including the confusion within certain acts and the inability for people to be able to provide safe venues. What I hear from this side, and it's unfortunate, is that they look at every licensed firearm owner like they are a criminal, and they are not. That's just exactly what I have heard from the left-hand side. I have been to Christchurch. I have met with the Muslim community. I did not meet with them for 15 minutes. I did not meet with them for 15 minutes, and I've met with a number of groups. Not only that, we have a Muslim reference group that we meet with as well. We have the Firearms Community Advisory Group. We also have the Ministers' Arms Advisory Group, for which there are Muslim members on it. So I request, in respect for the Muslim community that we actually look at moving forward instead of moving backwards, because the legislation that was put in place has errors in it. We've had judges, we've had lawyers, we've had barristers, and we've had people impacted by this saying that we are going to be in a not better place because of the legislation. We want to update it, upgrade it. This is part of phase 2. And all that we want to do is increase public safety. The member had made mention about New Zealand Police, like we're leaving them out of the equation. They are not. What we are removing from New Zealand Police is the administration and regulation of the Arms Act. New Zealand Police will still be there for the enforcement. What we are doing is ensuring that what Labor should have done in the last government when they created the Firearms Safety Authority is make it the truly independent authority that the Royal Commission inquiry, which I have read, outlines that it should be. Instead, it became an organisation that was run by police and staffed by police, and it wasn't really truly independent. Our goal is to ensure that that organisation still stays. It's just going to be administered by another agency, and it will support New Zealand Police with the enforcement of the Arms Act. They are not being excluded in any way. No one here wants to see the sort of atrocity that we saw on March the 15th, 2019, and I think certainly no firearms owner would either. But the reality is that the Arms Act is 40 years old, or over 40 years old, and it needs updating. This is part of the beginning of the reforms that this government has promised to do, and it will create part of the outcomes that we have said that we are after, which is increase public safety, which is make sure the regulatory requirements are fit for purpose and able to be complied with, which is looking at compliance, because once we have compliance, we have people within the box. What this side has done is brought in a whole lot of legislation that has been hard to deal with, hard to implement, and is actually costing people their time and, of course, their money, which of clubs are volunteers. I would like to see from this side of the House an agreement that we would be able to at least have the provision for some of those safety aspects that they had introduced remain, and allow and support clubs and ranges to be able to continue to operate so that they can continue to provide oversight and safety, training, education and handling, not only to firearm users but to their families as well.
Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Minister for engaging so well and attempting to answer so many of our questions. The area that I'd like a bit more information, and we heard a lot of this at the committee in terms of submitters, is around the lack of national standards for rifle and shotgun ranges. And we did actually hear from a number of club members from different ranges who were advocating for having a standard. It was equated to a road code, like one single standard of safety that would apply. And so the shooting range manual, which was issued by the Commissioner of Police, is seen as somewhat of a road code of how to use firearms safety. And a lot of effort, I understand, went into compiling that and having that information in one central place. That seems to me, and I'd be interested to hear, Madam Chair, from the Minister, to be a very useful tool for firearm safety in New Zealand. And so this bill undermines consistency and public confidence of those safety standards because it removes the current adherence to national standards for non-pistol ranges, rifle and shotgun ranges. And this, quite strangely too, is at odds with pistol ranges that must use the guidance issued by the Commissioner of Police. So we have two different standards under this legislation. We have the pistol ranges that have to use those standards, but the non-pistol ranges don't need to. They develop their own. So it basically means that those non-pistol rangers will be able to set their own standards, and police will only get the ability to inspect them against the operator's own rules. So they make their own rules up and police come and say, did you comply with your own rules or not? That doesn't seem right. It is not any law or regulation set by Parliament. They're completely looking after themselves. And on this side of the House, when we have a resource such as the shooting range manual issued by the Commissioner of Police, why would they not use that as a central reference, a road code for firearm safety in New Zealand? It seems strange that one half of rangers are required to use it and the other one does not. And also, Madam Chair, I would like to point out as well that I think as a bare minimum, they should be required to adhere to the ballistic safety guidelines in the police shooting range manual. That would seem to make good sense. And we heard many examples of where stray bullets had gone into sheds or farms or other areas. And we heard instances where under the previous regime, before it was regulated, that there were unsafe areas where there were not a barrier or a bank built, where if someone was riding a horse or partaking in mountain bike riding at a distance, the stray bullet could potentially risk and hurt a member of the public. So those ballistic safety guidelines outlined in the Commissioner of Police issued shooting range manual protect the public who are operating in and around those ranges. So it is a real concern that this legislation removes that requirement for non-pistol rangers who will be able to set their own standards. Many of those, not all of them, but a good few of members of those clubs actually thought there should be one code, one roadmap for firearm safety. So we heard from those who supported the bill, but when we asked that question to them, do you think that we should have non-pistol rangers to be able to use the guidance in that shooting range manual, many of them agreed with us. So I'm interested to know why the Minister is making that change. The other point I'm interested to know is that rifles and shotguns still present a serious safety risk. They're still firearms. There is suggestions in the bill that pistols are more of a serious safety concern, and I think the rationale is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they can be concealed, and so they are a higher safety risk. Therefore, they need to comply with this shooting range manual. But I don't understand why that occurs when rifles and shotguns still have the ability to shoot over a long distance and also should require a shooting range to comply with some ballistic safety standards, particularly if things have changed in and around that area or new developments have occurred. The other point I'd like to make is that police have publicly stated that it's about 70% of the firearms seized from criminals are the A category, or the non-prohibited firearms, and that would include a 22 or a normal rifle and shotgun. Madam Chair, can I just finish? I've only got a bit more to go. The Firearms Safety Code provides insight into the lethal risks from rifles and shotguns commonly used on non-pistol rangers. And Madam Chair, their long-range firing capacity is marked as a contrast to a pistol. A bullet fired from a common deer hunting rifle, such as a 308, can travel 4 kilometres. A 22 rifle, common for shooting possums and rabbits, can fire rounds that travel up to 2.5 kilometres. We need to be reassuring our communities that if these ranges are operating, that there are adequate safety protections in terms of ballistic, looking at where bullets can go and making sure that there are banks, and that's exactly what police did when they issued a number of safety notices under the first regime. There were a number of rangers not complying with those safety requirements. We were reassured when police went in and looked and required them to make those changes that those rangers were operating safely. Under this legislation, they do not have to comply with ballistic safety. That is a risk for rural communities, that is a risk for people who are partaking in recreational activities in rural New Zealand, and it is a real risk that if they're not complying and there's a stray bullet, that someone from the public could lose their life or be injured. And I'm interested to understand the Minister's rationale as to why pistol have to comply with this requirement, but non-pistol rangers do not.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
I'll start this by apologising to the member, the Honourable Megan Woods, because she asked me a question about this one as well, and I didn't address it in that one. So I thank the member for going further into this, because I think it's actually quite an interesting topic and one that should be traversed. The New Zealand Police Shooting Range Manual has been in existence. I think Inspector Joe Green was the one that first wrote it almost a couple of decades ago, and more recently, since March 2019, it has been updated. It has been and always will be a very good go-to guide for those that wish to start a range. The reason why we won't be encouraging it to be the be-all and end-all is for exactly what the member had just been talking about. The different ballistics for different types of projectiles. And while we are taught when we do our licence certification as part of the safety training, we are told a 22 has the ability to go 3 kilometres, not 2.5. A 308 has the ability to go 4.5 kilometres if there is no backstop. The ranges that are currently operating have always looked to their parent organisations who have the expertise and the skill set to know exactly what the cone of fire is for their particular range that they are going to be utilising, and whether or not there needs to be a restriction on the calibre. For example, at Trentham Rifle Range, which shoots back to 1,000 yards, there is a massive big hill behind there. The ballistics that are required, being that anything over 8mm cannot be shot on that range. The maximum amount of powder that you could possibly put into a case is also looked at and considered when they are establishing what the cone of fire needs to be. And what that cone of fire is will not be the same cone of fire that would be required for a 22 Target Shooting New Zealand indoor range. In fact, the cone of fire is drastically different, and none of that can be put into a shooting range manual. The shooting range manual established by New Zealand Police gives you the basics of what your baseline establishment of a range should look like. The parent organisations, for example, for shotgun, for indoor 22 shooting and for long range outdoor shooting, that actually is established by those that have that expertise to know what is needed. And they did this before March 2019. In fact, many of these organisations at their own expense had volunteer range officers go through education and be qualified to certify the rangers in their own disciplines. And this is extremely important. The member said and made quotes from what those in Select Committee had suggested about the shooting range manual. I think everyone who wants to establish a range will always go to that shooting range manual in the first instance to see what is required. Everything else on top of that has actually been placed on them by those parent organisations. And where we have perhaps in the future someone who does not have a parent organisation want to operate a range, they must ensure that they have range standing orders in place and that they meet the minimum requirements. I just would like to make a clarification, because I'm not sure if I said something incorrect, so I'm just going to make a clarification to something that I said earlier. The range standing orders will be able to be approved by the governing body or the parent organisation, as I had expressed, that the range is affiliated to. So this will mean that a shotgun range will not go to a full bore range and ask them to certify. If the shooting range isn't affiliated to a governing body or a parent organisation, then the police must approve the range standing orders. And of course, this means that we won't just have these pop-ups unless there is somebody that has oversight about how they are to operate. When we're talking about the safety notices, thank you, Madam Chair. I did watch some of the submissions on this bill, and I did see club members who were interviewed and the member herself had asked them, have you been issued a safety improvement notice? And the answer to that question by a few of the submitters was yes, I have. And when queried further, one example that was given was of a man who said, we were told we had to put tyres as backstops in behind our range, so we spent $10,000 of club money to put these tyres in, and then when we were reassessed and they came back to reassess what we'd done, they said, oh no, actually you can't have tyres there now. So that was a waste of time, effort, money for what was already in place, something that worked well and operated well. So what we need to ensure is that we're not wasting this, that we actually support these clubs to continue to operate. And when there was not a problem that needed to be fixed in the first place, it's allowing them to actually use that skill set, to actually use that expertise and to put it into the club, because as I mentioned earlier, no club wants to see their range closed. These are good people. These are really good people in our society. Those that have been judged to be fit and proper by New Zealand Police, they are not criminals. They are not potential terrorists. And when the finger is pointed at licensed firearm owners, the licensed firearm owners point back at who gives these people the licences and the fit and proper journey that must be maintained in the time that you have it. So when we're talking ballistic safety guidelines, the reason why we cannot just have this one shooting manual is because if we did that, we would create a public safety risk, because by only having that, we can't put over top of it the knowledge, the skills, the expertise, the extra danger zones that the parent organisations require of their members. And I have seen a lot of good work that has been done by these volunteers to maintain their ranges so people have a place to go, especially when it comes to sighting in their rifles. Because quite frankly, if these ranges close, then what we will see is people going down to the riverbank to sight in their rifles, people not getting oversight and safety education from those in the know, people who are not getting advice on the ballistics of their firearm and also their ammunition, and advice on what is the correct type to use. There is so much that can be lost here, but so much that can be gained. And that's what this government is going to ensure happens, that we gain public safety as a result of these changes.
Scott Willis. I'm just going to make the comment before I take the next call. We've traversed I know this is a really important bill, and I'm not trying to cut anyone off at this point, but I just want to say that I want specific clauses and very specific questions from here on in, because it's been quite a broad-ranging debate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have listened carefully to the Minister and been astonished at some times to hear that this side of the House considers all firearm owners as criminals or terrorists or something like that, when I am a firearm owner, and I respect other firearm owners, certainly those who are correct in their practice and who are safe. This is not about condemning firearm owners, but I do take issue with the Minister who made the statement that all firearm owners are good people. Clearly, that is false. Not all firearm owners are good people. Otherwise, we would not have shooting of other people in this country. We would not have March 15.
The Minister has just said that she didn't make that second statement. She did make the first one.
It wasn't. It was a paraphrase. I can't remember the exact words, but and the Minister earlier. The words do matter, and they will be noted in the recording of this this discussion. The Minister also I want to come back to 36XJ, the compliance section, inspections of shooting clubs and shooting ranges, because we have had an amendment proposed, and I'm unclear how the proposed amendment would reduce safety. Because if I look at clause 1, it says, for the purpose of ensuring that a shooting club or shooting range is operated in accordance with this Act, a person who is a member of the police and authorised in writing by the Commissioner may enter and inspect any shooting range, including any shooting club that is part of the range and any place where the shooting club stores firearms or ammunition, and inspect, print or copy documents that the person believes on reasonable grounds to be those of the shooting club or shooting range, and remove any hard copy documents that the person believes on reasonable grounds to be those of the shooting club or shooting range. Now that seems very sensible. What has been proposed is that clause 2 is removed, and clause 2 puts limits on when that can happen and ensures that there are police can only do it when there's a commissioner is considering application for certification or renewal of certification. So it actually negates the safety aspects of that previous section. That's why this amendment, this proposed amendment, is only about increasing safety. That's my question to the Minister. Why not accept an amendment that increases safety, that ensures that the good firearm owners are the people that we support, and that we have the ability to check? It is a very, very simple question. That's my first question. I have a couple of others, but I'll sit down now and wait.
And ask, it'd be good if you could ask.
My further question is we've heard that there are costs and benefits in this bill, and that's a question I'm not clear on. The size of those costs and benefits is something I'm really not clear on. I may have missed something. I've been looking for it. I can't see any evidence of costs and benefits noted down. I've had arguments for it, but I would like the Minister to give us some idea of where they lie.
When you refer to the costs and benefits, the Minister's unclear as to which section you're referring to.
I'm actually referring to the regulatory impact statement, which says here that is there an analysis available on the size and potential costs and benefits, and we're told that there is, yes, but I'm not aware of where that lies, and I'd like some information on it, please. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Nicole McKee.
Madam Chair, in answer to the Green member's first question, the effective clause 38XJ subsection 2 is to provide certainty to clubs and ranges on when their inspections are going to occur, while still allowing the police to actually carry out those inspections. And that could be in response to safety concerns that they may have, or as I'd mentioned in my opening speech, also in regard to a change in circumstances. The reason why I said that this could create a safety issue if it's removed is because removing the clause creates uncertainty for those volunteers who run the clubs and ranges, and it places a regulatory burden on them. But it also means that the police can't go in there for those reasons, which is when there's a change in circumstance or safety concerns. It does not allow them to go in and do it. So I'm going to actually, as I'd mentioned before, come back to the fact that these are trusted people and expertise. If there was an issue, these ranges would have been shut down. And if we look at what happened with the Bruce Rifle Club, for example, if we look at the Bruce Rifle Club, they were not shut down because you look at... So a member to my left is yelling out that there were 238 safety notices, and the majority of those safety notices were to do with administrative stuff. It had nothing to do with... No, it didn't. It had nothing to do with ballistics. And so I invite the member again, actually read the documentation. You are so fixated on chastising the volunteers that keep our clubs and ranges and our communities safe, and obviously not interested in supporting them to be able to do that. And those changes that were made in 2020 has had this flow-on effect, and the lack of support is expected from them. And just while I'm on my feet, is looking also at Amendment Paper 1.50.03 about 38XI. I don't agree with that, which is making the shooting range manual compulsory for everybody. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it's about guidance and that we would have safety issues if we made everyone conform to what is meant to be the basis and not allow the oversight of those parent organisations to be a part of. So I do not support the amendment to 38XJ subsection 2 because I do believe that that will create safety issues. I'll come back to the member shortly on his second question that he asked me.
Honourable Ginny Anderson.
Very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to speak to another amendment that I've put forward, and that's in relation to the commencement of this Act. And there's a couple of points I would like to make in this space. Firstly, both in Select Committee and then again during Scrutiny Week, police themselves made the comment that they would like an extended commencement date for this bill. And so that was important to enable...
The commencement date's actually in Part 2.
Is in Part 2, sorry?
In Clauses 1 and 2, sorry.
Okay, I thought we were doing a general, we're just not doing...
No, we have.
Okay.
To my knowledge,
So
no
Part
one's
1.
agreed to take it
Sorry,
as one
I'll make
part.
another point, Madam Speaker. What I would like to talk about, Madam Speaker, and sorry, I thought we were doing it all as one. So, not commencement. Title and commencement.
No, we're just on Part 1.
Part 1. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that, Madam Speaker. In terms of what I would like to discuss then is to talk about and the other matter. I should have the act out. Other matters as well. That's in. No, that's as well. Okay, right back onto it. So, in terms of some of the issues that were raised with the Select Committee, and I'd really like the Minister to answer in relation to the policy problem that's been identified in the regulatory impact statement, and that was the fact that there would be a risk that the overburdened nature would cause clubs to close down. And there was quite clear information provided both in the regulatory impact statement and also through advice of officials that there was no clear evidence that the additional administrative requirements put on volunteers would actually lead to any clubs closing. And then when further information was asked for, there was actually no evidence that any clubs had closed at all as a result of those additional administrative requirements that were put on clubs post 2019. And so the whole purpose of this piece of legislation is that it's going to improve safety by stopping clubs shutting down, and if they shut down then people would be practising with firearms in an unregulated or an unsupervised manner. But the problem that we have on this side of the House, Madam Speaker, is that we feel that the Minister has not demonstrated anywhere through the policy process or the legislative process that there is an actual problem here that needs to be solved, because what the officials said is that there was no clear evidence when they did their assessment in the regulatory impact statement. And in fact, a lot of the evidence that they relied upon was the life experience of the Minister and information that the Minister herself had gleaned from going out and speaking with different rifle ranges. And so I think it's important, Madam Speaker, that if we're changing the law, if we're changing safety requirements in and around firearms in New Zealand, that we're actually fixing a problem that has been identified. And the irony is, Madam Speaker, that the same party that the Minister represents has got a regulatory standards bill, and in that regulatory standards bill...
I think we're actually moving on to a bill that's not relevant.
I just wanted to highlight a contradiction that is problematic to this legislation.
I also want to point out also that this has had the discretion of a select committee as well.
True, okay.
Yes.
Can I make this point?
One point.
One point. And in the other bill, it says no law should be passed without showing what problem is being solved, whether the benefits outweigh the costs, and who pays the costs and gets the benefits. So I apply that to this, Madam Speaker. Can the Minister please tell us, for this bill, that what is the problem that she's actually trying to solve? Where is the evidence for the problem that she's trying to solve? What are the benefits that outweigh the costs? Because on this side of the House, we actually think the costs lie with the general public, who have a greater risk of ballistics not being done properly and of people unsupervised on ranges. We believe that risk, that public safety risk, is far greater than the risk of a club potentially shutting, which hasn't done. And the final point in that same quote from the other bill is who pays the costs and who gets the benefits. And I would say that it's that member's supporters who gets the benefits, and the costs is the safety of the New Zealand public.
Honourable Nicole McKee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Green member who asked me about the costs and benefits in the impact statement, regulatory impact statement, information for the costs and benefits is available in the Ministry's RIS, and I think what you were asking me is that there were actually no numbers there, and you were looking for some numbers. Have I got that right? Right. Okay. There's no additional costs for the pistol clubs and their ranges, and the reason for that is it's basically status quo. The only thing that we're changing there is their reporting date, so they have 2 months at the end of their financial year, so there's no cost in that because they would be doing that anyway. The cost savings are actually for the regulator. So the regulator at the moment has within legislation where they can go in and see every 5 years a particular club. Some of them have been turning up every 6 months, doing the same sort of thing, or not necessarily every 6 months, but in under the 5 years. So this will actually relieve some of those costs. And of course, my understanding is that before this comes in, those clubs that we're waiting to be inspected should all be inspected by then. So I think that the cost savings for clubs and ranges is the certainty of when they have to interact with the regulator, but also it's personal costs, because I'd mentioned that they were volunteers. They've been having to take days off work, their paid employment, to turn up at the club whenever they're asked to by the regulator. There is a benefit to society, and this is speaking to the other member's point as well, if we have these clubs and ranges operating. 2 clubs have actually shut down, and there were a series of individuals who had approached me before the legislation came in to tell me they were shutting their clubs down as well. There is a cost to society if we don't have safe places for people to be able to participate, to get safety education, to have the oversight of those with the expertise. There is a cost to society if we don't have this implemented. And I think that far outweighs the cost of a regulator turning up outside of their 5-year time frame. In my humble opinion, the cost to society by not having clubs and ranges operating is absolutely huge. The benefits of this is to the public, and it has a public safety impact because we keep these ranges open. These ranges are still looked at. These are not just anyone can open up a range. It clearly states within the bill how a range must be established, what oversight there must be, including the fact that if those with the parent organisations, those that do not have a parent organisation, actually still having to come under the umbrella and approval of New Zealand Police. And I think this is a good thing. This is not about just allowing anyone to be able to open up a range. And I think, again, I see the benefit to society by having these ranges open. And I think we should have more of them. They should be in every town all over New Zealand, because then we know where everybody is going to be, and we know that the oversight and education that they get will also be consistent with the safety education that they get at the time of applying for their licence. So you cannot put a number on that, but I'm hoping that just what I've expressed, whether or not the member agrees with it, explains a bit of it.
Tim Costley. The question is that debate on this question now close. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. A party vote is being called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed. The question is that Honourable Ginny Anderson's tabled amendment to Clause 5 to insert new Section 38XIA be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. The noes have it. A party vote is being called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand
8
First.
votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Honourable Ginny Anderson's tabled amendment to Clause 5 to delete subsection 2 in new Section 38XJ be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. Aye. The noes have it. Party vote has been called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes opposed.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes in favour.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes in favour.
ACT New Zealand.
11 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 49, the noes are 68. The question is not agreed. The question is that Part 1 stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. The ayes have it. No. Party vote is being called for, please, Clerk.
New Zealand National.
49 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party of Aotearoa, New Zealand.
15 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
11 in favour.
New Zealand First.
8 votes in favour.
Te Pāti Māori.
The ayes are 68, the noes are 49. The question is agreed. Members, during the committee's debate on the District Court Judges Amendment Bill, the Chair omitted to put the vote on Clause 1 standing part. I will put this question now. The question is that Clause 1 of the District Court Judges Amendment Bill stand part. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The question is agreed. The records of the House will reflect the committee's decision. Members, the time has come for me to report progress.
Members, the House is resumed.
Madam Speaker, the committee has considered the District Court Judges Amendment Bill and reports it without amendment. The committee has also considered the Arms, Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill and reports progress. Madam Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The District Court Judges Amendment Bill is set down for third reading next sitting day, and the Arms, Shooting Clubs, Shooting Ranges and Other Matters Amendment Bill is set down for further consideration. Members, the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. on Tuesday, the 4th of March. Safe travels.